She found the receipt in his coat pocket on a Tuesday morning, a dinner for two at a restaurant she had never been taken to, champagne. She had never tasted, a signature that wasn't hers scrawled beside her husband's name. Vivian Carter stood in that marble hallway and felt 22 years of her life crack like a wine glass under a heel. He thought she would weep. He thought she would beg. He thought she would disappear quietly so he could parade his mistress through the ballrooms of their world. He was wrong about all three. If you're watching from New York, Los Angeles, Houston, Chicago, London, Sydney, or anywhere in between, drop a comment below telling me your city. Hit that like button and stay with me until the end. I want to see how far Vivian's story travels tonight. Because what this woman does next, what she lets a dangerous stranger help her do, is going to leave a scar on that man's name that 100 lawyers can't scrub clean. Let's begin. The house on Ashmere Drive was the kind of house that photographed better than it lived in. 7 bedrooms, 2 staircases, a kitchen the size of most people's apartments, with a slab of Calicotta marble the contractor had flown in from a quarry outside Carrara because Gregory had insisted the veining had to be vertical, not horizontal. The foyer alone was 32 feet high. There was an actual echo in it. Vivian had learned over the years not to call out her husband's name from the front door because the echo made her sound desperate. And Gregory Shaw did not tolerate desperation in any form, least of all in his wife. It was 6:47 on a Tuesday morning in late October when Vivian came down the curved staircase in a silk robe the color of old pearls, her hair still a little damp at the nape. The house was quiet in that expensive way. The quiet you pay for with triple-pane glass and imported rugs that swallow footsteps. Beatrice, their housekeeper, was already in the kitchen. Vivian could hear the soft clink of a kettle being set down on the induction range. Gregory's Bentley was gone from the circular drive. It had been gone since 4:30. She had heard the garage door, heard the tires on the pea gravel, heard the gate hum open and shut. He had a breakfast meeting in the city, he'd said the night before, or a flight, or both. He no longer really bothered to keep the stories straight because he no longer really bothered to believe she was paying attention. That was his first mistake. Vivian had been paying attention for a long time. Longer than he realized, she just hadn't done anything about it yet. In the kitchen, Beatrice, a small, sturdy woman in her 50s with a gray braid down her back, looked up from the espresso machine and gave her a small, careful smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Shaw. He left early. He always leaves early now. I made the eggs the way you like. Soft. Thank you, Bea." Vivian slid onto one of the counter stools and let her hands lie flat on the cold marble. She noticed, as she sometimes did lately, that her wedding ring had started to feel heavy. Not emotionally, physically, like she was suddenly aware of the weight of the stone, the density of the platinum band, as if her hand was telling her something her mouth wouldn't. "You look tired, ma'am." "I didn't sleep well." Beatrice didn't answer. Beatrice had been with them 11 years and knew, with the awful clarity of people who clean other people's bedrooms, exactly how long it had been since Gregory last spent a full night in the primary suite. Beatrice knew about the guest room on the 3rd floor. Beatrice knew about the cologne that wasn't Gregory's usual showing up on his dinner jackets. Beatrice, bless her, had never once said a word. That would change today. Vivian Carter had married Gregory Shaw at 26 in a chapel in Newport on a morning so bright the photographer had complained about the glare. She had been, at the time, a junior buyer at a mid-sized department store with a scholarship background, a mother in assisted living in New Jersey, and exactly $3,000 in savings. Gregory had been 34, already wealthy, already handsome in the hard-jawed way that older women called promising and younger women called dangerous. He had told her, at their second dinner, that he wanted a wife who would walk into any room and make him proud. He had said it like a job offer. She had, in the way of 26-year-old women who have worked too hard for too little, treated it like one. For a long time, it had been good. That was the part Vivian kept coming back to, in the quiet hours. It had really, genuinely been good. Gregory, in his 30s, had been a force. Witty at the table, generous with her mother's medical bills, ambitious in a way that felt contagious. He had built Shaw Capital Partners out of a 2-room office on Lexington into a firm that managed, by the time their 10th anniversary came and went, just over $3.5 billion. He had put her on the boards of 2 charities, He had paid for her mother's funeral, handled the paperwork, stood beside her at the graveside in a black cashmere coat, and not once let her cry alone. She had loved him. She still, some mornings, couldn't remember if she was using the past tense because it was accurate or because it hurt less. The shift hadn't happened all at once. That was the cruel part. If a man gets cold overnight, a woman knows. But Gregory had cooled the way a winter moves in, 1 degree at a time, a missed anniversary, and an expensive bracelet to paper over it. A new assistant, all of 24 with a laugh that cut through rooms. Business trips that extended by a day, then 2. Phone calls taken in the garden instead of the study. A look at a charity gala in June, when a woman in a scarlet dress walked past their table and Gregory's whole face went still for half a second before he remembered where he was. Vivian had seen it. She had cataloged it. She had, and this was the part she would later be hardest on herself for, decided month after month that it was nothing, that she was imagining things. The 22 years of marriage were not the kind of thing a sensible woman torched over a look. She had been wrong. The coat was a camel overcoat, Italian, worn maybe 6 times. Gregory had left it on the bench in the mudroom the night before instead of hanging it in his closet, which was itself unusual. Gregory was a man who refolded his own pocket squares. Vivian had picked it up at 7:15 on that Tuesday morning with the idea of carrying it upstairs to his valet stand, and the receipt had fallen out of the inside breast pocket like a dead leaf. She saw the word Maison Véron first. The restaurant. She knew it. She had suggested it years ago for an anniversary, and Gregory had told her it was too fussy. She saw the date next, 8 days ago, a Monday. She saw the amount, $1,842. She saw the signature, G. Shaw, his, unmistakably, with the tight little loop on the S. And then, at the very bottom, she saw the handwritten note the sommelier had added in blue ink, the way fine restaurants sometimes do when a regular brings someone special. For Mr. Shaw and Miss Lane, our compliments on the Bollinger 2007. Until next time. Miss Lane. Vivian stood in the mudroom with the coat in one hand and the receipt in the other, and the first thing she felt was not rage. It was not even sadness. It was a strange, almost surgical stillness, as if someone had just told her the results of a biopsy she had been half expecting for months. Her knees did not buckle. Her eyes did not fill. She folded the receipt carefully along its existing creases and put it in the pocket of her robe, and hung the coat on the bench the way Beatrice would have hung it, and walked back into the kitchen and drank her coffee while it was still hot. "Ma'am?" Beatrice said after a minute. "Are you all right?" Vivian did not lie to Beatrice. She had never lied to Beatrice. But she did, for the first time in their 11 years, decline to answer. "I need to make some phone calls, B. Would you tell Marco I won't be needing the car until 11? "Of course, Mrs. Shaw." "And B, if Gregory comes home early, which he won't, but if he does, please tell him I've gone to the city." Beatrice's eyes flickered. She did not nod so much as bow, just slightly, at the neck. "Yes, ma'am." Bum. Upstairs, in the study that Gregory thought of as his, and that was technically hers because she had paid for it with her own earnings 12 years before anyone had ever heard of Shaw Capital Partners, Vivian sat down at the desk and for a long time did absolutely nothing. She looked at the framed photograph on the corner of the desk. Them, at 40 and 48, on a terrace in Amalfi. Gregory's arm around her waist, her laughing. The sky a blue so absurd it looked painted. She looked at the silver letter opener she had been given for her 50th birthday. She looked at her hands, which, at 48, were still good hands, she thought. A little thinner than they used to be. A little more veined. But good hands. A woman's hands, not a girl's. She thought, he is going to humiliate me. She thought, he has already humiliated me. I just didn't know the audience was this big. She thought with a clarity that surprised her. Miss Lane, because Miss Lane, she was now almost sure, was Celeste Lane, 29, junior associate at Shaw Capital Partners for exactly 11 months, blonde in the way that cost $400 a visit to maintain, had been seated at their table at the June gala, had laughed a little too easily at one of Gregory's jokes, and then, when she caught Vivian watching, had looked down at her plate with the particular kind of modest smile that only a woman who is sleeping with someone else's husband can produce. Vivian had noted it then, and swallowed it, and told herself she was being insecure. She was not, it turned out, being insecure. She was being outmaneuvered. She picked up her phone. Not the iPhone that Gregory had given her, the one that synced to the family iCloud and that she had, for the past 3 years, been quietly aware was probably being read over her shoulder by someone in her husband's security team. A different phone, an older one. A gift from a woman she had met at a board meeting 4 years ago, a divorce attorney named Margaret Holloway, who had taken one look at Vivian at a fundraising lunch and said, in a voice pitched exactly low enough for no one else to hear, "Sweetheart, if you ever need me, you call me on a phone he doesn't know about. Keep one in a drawer, promise me." Vivian had laughed and gone home, and 3 days later had gone to a Verizon store in a town she never shopped in and bought a cheap Android on a prepaid plan and put it in the back of her lingerie drawer. She had never used it. She used it now. Margaret Holloway answered on the third ring. "This is Holloway." "It's Vivian Carter." She was a little surprised, saying it. She hadn't used her maiden name on a phone call in 20 years. "Shaw. I'm sorry. Vivian Shaw." There was the shortest possible pause on the other end. Then Margaret Holloway said, very calmly, "Carter is fine, honey. Carter is better. Where are you?" "Home. In the study." "Is he there?" "No, he's in the city, supposedly." "Is anyone else in the room with you?" "No." "All right, take a breath. Tell me what you found." Vivian told her about the receipt, about Maison Véron, about Miss Lane, about the 11 months in the gala and the little smile. She told her everything in under 4 minutes, in the flat, efficient tone of a woman reading her own autopsy report. When she was done, Margaret Holloway said, "Vivian, I need you to listen to me carefully. Can you do that?" "Yes. This is not the first receipt. This is the one you found. There are going to be more. There are going to be emails. There are going to be hotel charges. There is going to be a paper trail that is much longer and much worse than one dinner. Do you understand me?" "Yes. Do not," I'm going to say this twice, "do not confront him. Not tonight. Not tomorrow. Not this week. If you confront him now, you lose every advantage. He will move money. He will move her. He will get ahead of you. Do you understand?" "Yes." "Good girl." Margaret Holloway exhaled. "Now, second thing. What is your gut telling you he's planning?" Vivian looked at the photograph on the desk. Amalfi. Absurd blue sky. "I think he's going to leave me," she said. "I think he's going to leave me publicly. I think he's going to walk into the Whitmore Foundation gala next month with her on his arm and let the room find out before I do." The silence on the other end was so long she thought the call had dropped. Then Margaret Holloway said very softly, "Sweetheart, then we have 4 weeks." Gregory Shaw came home at 8:40 that night, in the kind of good mood Vivian had learned over 22 years to fear more than his bad ones. He walked into the kitchen whistling. Actually whistling. A jazz standard, something from an album he used to play when they were first dating. He kissed the top of her head the way a man kisses a favorite dog. He said, "Smells incredible, B," to the housekeeper, who was plating sea bass. And then he turned to Vivian and said, "Darling, I have news." Vivian set down her wine glass very carefully. "Oh?" "The Whitmore Foundation Gala, November 18th. "I remember. I want you to wear the green Valentino." She waited. That was not the news. That was never the news with Gregory. That was the wrapping. He opened the Sub-Zero, took out a bottle of Sancerre, poured himself a glass, and said, "And I want to make an announcement that night. About the firm, some restructuring. Celeste, you remember Celeste from the June thing? She's been promoted. She's going to be running the Zurich office. It's a big deal. I'd like us to be there together, as a couple, supporting her." Vivian held her face absolutely still. She had been underestimating him. He was not planning to humiliate her at the gala. He was planning to use her as a prop at the gala, to make Celeste's rise look innocent, to buy himself another 3 or 4 months of cover, and then, probably after the holidays, probably in that gentlemanly post-New Year's stretch when the board was traveling, he was going to humiliate her. He was going to use her own grace to set the stage for her own erasure. "Of course, darling," Vivian said. She smiled. It was not a hard smile. She realized, quite good at this. She had just never tried before. The green Valentino. I'll have it steamed. That's my girl. Gregory? Hmm? Is there anything else I should know? About the firm? Anything I should be prepared for? He looked at her. For a single suspended second, his eyes did the thing his eyes did when he was assessing whether or not a man across a conference table was lying. It was the look that had, over 2 decades, built Shaw Capital Partners. Then he smiled. Nothing for you to worry about, sweetheart. That's what you have me for. He walked out of the kitchen humming. Vivian did not move for a full 30 seconds. Then she picked up the wine glass and discovered, with some distant interest, that her hand was perfectly steady. She couldn't sleep that night. She lay in the dark of the primary suite in the enormous bed that had not, for over a year, held 2 people at the same time, and she listened to the house breathe, the hum of the HVAC, the distant click of the ice maker, the occasional creak of the beams settling, because even a house this expensive had opinions about the weather. She thought about her mother. Her mother had died at 61 of a stroke, in a facility in New Jersey that Gregory had paid for because Vivian had not, at 30, been able to. Her mother had worked 41 years as a bookkeeper for a lighting wholesaler in Paterson. Her mother had, at Vivian's wedding, held her by both shoulders in the vestry of the chapel and said, "Vivi, listen to me. A man who is good to you in public and cold to you in private, you leave. You don't wait. You don't stay for the house. You leave." Vivian had laughed. She had said, "Ma, he's not cold." Her mother had said, "Not yet." Vivian turned her face into the pillow and, for the first time since the receipt had fallen out of the coat, she cried. Not loudly, not messily, a tight, contained crying, the kind women of a certain age and a certain zip code have perfected, because there is always someone in the house who might hear. She cried for about 4 minutes. She cried for the girl in the chapel in Newport. She cried for her mother, who had known. She cried for the 22 years, which had not all been a lie. That was the cruelest part, which had, for a real and measurable portion of them, been good. She cried for the version of Gregory who had stood in a cemetery in New Jersey and not let her fall. Then she stopped crying, because crying was not going to help her, and she got up. She walked barefoot down the corridor to Gregory's dressing room. He was asleep in the 3rd-floor guest suite. He had, at some point in the past year, stopped even pretending otherwise. She moved quietly. The light from the hallway threw long bars across the walk-in closet. She was not looking for anything. She had already found the only thing she needed. She was just, she realized, standing in the middle of his closet, surrounded by $200,000 worth of suits, taking an inventory. A last look at the man she had built her life around before she started taking him apart. On the top shelf of his closet, behind a stack of cashmere sweaters that Beatrice rotated seasonally, she saw something she had never seen before, a phone charger. The braided kind. Rose gold. Gregory's chargers were black. Gregory hated rose gold. Gregory had, in fact, once made a joke at a dinner party about a banker's daughter whose entire apartment was that millennial pink nonsense, and everyone had laughed, and Vivian had laughed too, because she loved him. She reached up and took the charger down. It was plugged into nothing. It had just been coiled up there, hidden, forgotten, the way men forget the small things that betray them. She held it in her hand and stood there for a long time. She was going to need help, she realized. Margaret Holloway was a divorce attorney, and a very good one. And Margaret Holloway could win her a settlement, could take Gregory to the cleaners in a civil sense. She could walk away rich. She could walk away public. She could walk away with the house on Ashmere and half the firm on paper if they fought hard enough. But Gregory Shaw was not going to go quietly for money. Vivian had watched him for 22 years. Gregory Shaw went quietly for information. That was the currency he actually respected. That was the only currency he had ever feared. He had built a fortune over 2 decades by knowing things about other men that other men did not know he knew. Vivian did not know things, but she knew a woman who might know a man who did. The woman's name was Elena Ruiz. She was 51 years old, ran a private art advisory firm in Chelsea, and was, in the judgment of exactly 3 people in New York City, the best-connected woman on the Eastern Seaboard. Vivian had met her 6 years earlier at a Whitney board event, and had liked her instantly because Elena Ruiz laughed like a woman who had been through a divorce and survived it, which, as it turned out, she had, twice. They met on Thursday morning at a tiny cafe on West 11th that Elena picked because the owner was a friend, and there was a back booth that couldn't be seen from the street. Vivian did not bring the receipt. She had photographed it and emailed the photograph to Margaret Holloway and burned the original in the study fireplace, because Margaret Holloway had told her to, and because it had felt, in a small and satisfying way, like the first thing she had set fire to in her adult life. Elena looked at her across the booth, over a cup of black coffee, and said, "Honey, you look like a woman who just found out something." "I did. I'm so sorry." "I don't want sympathy, Elena. I want a name." Elena's eyebrows went up, slightly, calmly. "A name. I want the name of someone who can tell me what my husband has been doing with his money for the past 2 years, and I want the name of someone who can make him regret it." Elena did not answer right away. She took a sip of her coffee. She set the cup down. She looked at Vivian for what felt like a long time, not unkindly, but the way you look at a horse before you buy it, to see if it has the nerve for what you're about to ask of it. "Vivian," she said finally, "I have one name. It's the only name you'll need, but I want you to understand what I'm giving you." "All right." "The man I'm going to send you to is not a businessman. He has business interests. That is not the same thing. He does not do favors. He does not owe me anything, and he will not owe you anything. If you go to him and he decides to help you, it will be because he has decided you are worth his time, and for no other reason. Do you understand?" "Yes." "If he decides you are not worth his time, you will never see him again, and you will never speak of the meeting. Do you understand?" "Yes." "He is very dangerous, Vivian, not to you. He has a strange kind of honor about women in your situation. But to your husband, yes, extremely. Once you pull this trigger, you cannot unpull it. Gregory will not only be ruined, he will be ruined publicly, and he will never know, for the rest of his life, exactly how it happened, only that it did." "Elena." "Yes." "Give me the name." Elena reached into her handbag. She took out a small cream-colored card. No logo, no title, only a name in black ink and a single phone number beneath it. Dominic Moretti. "Call him at 6 p.m. on a weekday," Elena said. "Never on a weekend, never at night. The phone is answered by a man named Luca, who will ask you who referred you. You say my name. He will ask you what the meeting is about. You say a domestic matter. You do not say more than that on the phone. Ever." "Where do I meet him?" "He'll tell you. It won't be where you expect." Elena paused. "Vivian, one last thing." "Yes." "Do not lie to him. Not about anything. Not about how much you loved your husband. Not about how much you still love him. Not about how scared you are. Dominic Moretti eats liars for breakfast, and he has a very particular kind of respect for women who tell the truth about their own marriages. That will be your entire edge with him. Do you understand me?" Vivian took the card. She put it in the inside zip pocket of her handbag, not the main compartment, not the phone pocket. The inside zip. "I understand," she said. She did not at that moment feel afraid. She felt, for the first time in roughly 14 months, awake. She walked 12 blocks after she left the cafe. She didn't take the car. She told Marco to circle and she walked. Up Hudson, across on Perry, past a bakery that smelled like butter, past a florist setting out buckets of white ranunculus, past a young couple arguing about something small on a stoop, and she thought, as she walked, about all the things she had not let herself think about for 14 months. She thought about the night in May when she had come home from a fundraiser at the Met and walked into the library and Gregory had snapped his laptop shut too fast. She thought about the trip to Geneva last summer, the one he had not invited her on, even though they used to take the Geneva trip together every July for 15 years because she loved the lake. She thought about the way he had, at Easter, at his sister's house in Connecticut, let his eyes slide over her at the dinner table like she was a cousin, not coldly, just absently, like he was already done. She thought about 100 other things, large and small, and she let herself feel, just for the duration of those 12 blocks, the full weight of what had been done to her. Not a clean betrayal, not a single act. A slow, deliberate unthreading, carried out by a man who had once, in a chapel in Newport, looked her in the eyes and meant every word. She stopped on the corner of Hudson and West 14th, and she stood there in the cold October air with her coat open, and she thought very clearly, "You decided I would disappear quietly. You decided I was disposable. You made a plan. You signed receipts in my family's name. You promoted her to Zurich, and you asked me to wear the green Valentino to watch. You made one mistake, Gregory. You married a woman who was raised by a bookkeeper. I can read a ledger." At 6:02 p.m. that evening, from the prepaid Android she kept in the back of her lingerie drawer, Vivian Carter dialed the number on the cream-colored card. It rang twice. A man's voice answered, calm, middle-aged, accented, but faintly. "Yes. My name is Vivian Carter. Elena Ruiz gave me this number." A pause. "The matter?" "Domestic." Another pause, a little longer. "Mrs. Carter, are you safe at this moment?" The question surprised her. It was not a question she had been expecting. It was not, she realized, a question anyone had asked her in a very long time. "Yes," she said. "Physically, yes. I'm safe." "Good." The man, Luca, she assumed, exhaled. "Mr. Moretti will meet with you Saturday afternoon, 3 o'clock. A private room at the Ellsworth Club on East 63rd. You will ask the concierge for Mr. Abernathy. You will be shown up. You will come alone. You will bring nothing. No phone, no handbag, no recording device. Anything you want him to see, you bring it in your head." "All right." "Mrs. Carter." "Yes?" "Mr. Moretti has asked me to tell you one thing before you come." "All right." "He has already heard your husband's name, once, from a source in Zurich, about 9 months ago, in connection with a transaction he found irregular. He did not pursue it at the time because it was not his concern. He has asked me to tell you that if you would like it to become his concern, he is willing to discuss terms." Vivian stood in the walk-in closet of the primary suite with a prepaid phone pressed to her ear and stared at the hem of a green Valentino gown, hanging on a padded hanger wrapped in a clear plastic sleeve, waiting for November 18th. "Tell him," she said, and she was surprised at how her own voice sounded, low and even, and not at all the voice of a woman who had cried into a pillow 3 nights earlier, "Tell him I'll see him Saturday at 3. She hung up. She put the phone back in the drawer. She looked at herself in the mirror on the back of the closet door. 48 years old. Dark hair still her own, shot through now with 1 or 2 threads of silver she had stopped pulling out. Eyes she recognized, for the first time in a long time, as her mother's eyes. Not the eyes of the girl in the Newport Chapel, a bookkeeper's daughter's eyes. Downstairs she could hear Gregory laughing on a phone call, the warm, easy laugh he used with people he wanted something from. She could hear Beatrice in the kitchen, setting out the good silver for the dinner he had asked her to prepare for 2 old partners from Chicago. Vivian zipped the dress bag closed over the green Valentino, smoothed the plastic with her palm, and walked down to join her husband. She smiled at him across the table that night. She laughed at his jokes. She was gracious with the partners from Chicago. She was, Gregory told her later in the kitchen with his hand on the small of her back, a perfect hostess. "What would I do without you, darling?" he said. "I don't know, Gregory," Vivian said, and she kissed him once, very lightly, at the corner of the mouth. "I honestly don't know." She went upstairs. She ran a hot bath. She lay in it for a long time with her eyes closed, and she pictured, very precisely, a private room at the Ellsworth Club on East 63rd Street on Saturday afternoon at 3 o'clock. She pictured a man she had never met. She pictured herself walking in alone, with nothing in her hands, with everything in her head. She pictured, finally, and this was the first time in 14 months that the image had not made her feel sick, but had instead made her feel something hot and clean and alive at the base of her spine. She pictured her husband's face at some future gala, in some future ballroom, at the exact moment he understood. She opened her eyes. The water was going cold. She got out of the bath, dried herself carefully, and went to sleep alone in the enormous bed, and for the first time in over a year, she slept all the way through the night. The next 3 days were the longest Vivian had lived through in 22 years of marriage, and the strangest part was that, on the outside, they looked like the best 3 days she'd had in months. She went to her Pilates class on Thursday morning. She had lunch with two friends from the Whitney board at a place on Madison where the salads cost $38 and nobody finished them. She sat for a fitting at her tailor's for the green Valentino, stood on the little raised platform in her stocking feet while a woman named Morella pinned the hem, and when Morella asked her through a mouthful of pins whether she wanted the bodice taken in another quarter-inch for the gala, Vivian looked at herself in the three-way mirror for a long second and said, "Yes, take it in. I want to be able to feel the dress." Morella glanced up, a little surprised. "You've lost weight, Mrs. Shaw." "Have I?" "Maybe 4 pounds, 5. "I hadn't noticed," Vivian said, which was a lie, and she smiled at Morella in the mirror. And Morella, who had been dressing wealthy wives in Manhattan for 19 years and had seen this exact look on this exact kind of woman before, smiled back very carefully and said nothing. At home, Vivian was gentler with Gregory than she had been in a year. She asked him about the Chicago partners. She laughed, genuinely, at a story he told about a man named Pritchard who had lost $40 million on a palladium bet and had taken it, in Gregory's words, like an absolute gentleman, which is to say, he drank 3 martinis and cried in the men's room. She poured him a nightcap on Friday evening and sat across from him in the library and asked him, with what she hoped was just the right blend of innocence and wifely interest, how things were going with the Zurich restructuring. "It's complicated, darling." "Try me." He smiled at her over the rim of his glass. The smile of a man who had not, in some long time, been asked a real question by his wife, and who had forgotten that she used to be good at them. "Regulatory stuff," he said. "Some of the positions we took last year, it's a compliance thing. Nothing for you to worry about." "Is Celeste handling it?" A small pause. A very small one. If she had not been listening for it, she would not have heard it. "Celeste is part of the team, yes." "She must be very capable." "She's sharp." "You've said that before." "Have I?" He looked at her, and for a flicker of a second she saw something behind his eyes she had not seen in a long time. Calculation. He was finally paying attention to her. Not much, not enough, but a little. "At the June gala," Vivian said lightly, "you told Harold Beck she was the sharpest young hire you'd made in a decade." "Did I?" Gregory swirled his drink. "Well, she is. I'm glad, darling. I want her to do well in Zurich." "Do you?" "Of course I do. It's your firm, Gregory. What's good for the firm is good for us." He held her eyes for one beat longer than was comfortable. Then he leaned forward and kissed her, on the mouth, which he had not done in almost 3 months, and said, "You are a remarkable woman, Vivian Carter." It had been a long time since he'd used her maiden name. It had, in fact, been since the wedding night. She did not know whether he had done it on purpose, or whether it had slipped out of him from a drawer in his own memory he had forgotten he owned, and in the hot, dark place behind her ribs where the thing had started to live, she felt, for one terrible instant, the old want for him. The old reflex of a wife who had loved her husband for 22 years and had not stopped loving him on any particular day, had only, at some point, started loving him in the past tense, the way you love a house you no longer live in. She kissed him back. She made her face soft. She said, "Good night, Gregory." She went upstairs and she shook, in the dark of the bathroom, with the door locked, for about a minute, braced against the sink, until the shaking stopped. Then she washed her face in cold water and went to bed. He had kissed her on purpose. She was sure of it by the time she turned out the light. He had smelled something on her, some subtle change in her weather, and he had kissed her to reset the dial, to remind her that she was still his, to buy himself another week. Gregory Shaw had built a $3.5 billion firm on his ability to sense when a counterparty was starting to get cold feet and to warm them up with exactly the right gesture at exactly the right moment. She was a counterparty now. Good. She slept 4 hours. Saturday morning, she told him she was going to the city to look at a necklace Harry Winston was holding for her, which was, technically, true. She had asked them 2 weeks earlier to pull a few pieces for her to see, and she had chosen Saturday afternoon precisely so that the story would hold up if he ever checked. Gregory nodded without looking up from his iPad. "Buy something nice, darling. You deserve it." "Do I?" she said, and he missed it entirely because he was already back in his email. Marco drove her into the city and let her out at 5th and 56th. She walked into Harry Winston's and sat in the private viewing room and let a saleswoman named Diane show her 4 necklaces, none of which she wanted and any of which she could have bought, and she asked Diane to hold the 3rd one for a week so that she could think about it. She said it in the warm, slightly distracted way of a wealthy wife who had been buying jewelry from Diane for 11 years and trusted her, and Diane, who had had a long career in this very room and knew when a client was buying something and when a client was buying an alibi, said, "Of course, Mrs. Shaw. I'll put it in the safe with your name on it." Vivian thanked her. She walked out onto 5th Avenue at 2:27 p.m. She did not take the car. She told Marco, through the driver's window, that she felt like walking and that she would text him when she wanted pickup. And Marco, who was a good man and had 3 daughters of his own, looked at her once, carefully, and said, "Take your time, Mrs. Shaw." She walked to the Ellsworth Club on East 63rd. She had never been inside the Ellsworth Club. She knew of it. Everyone in her world knew of it, in the vague way they knew of the Knickerbocker and the Metropolitan and the Union, only more so, because the Ellsworth Club did not advertise its existence, did not appear on any list of clubs, did not have a name on its door. It was simply a limestone townhouse between Park and Madison, with a single brass button set into the stone and a door that opened, when you pressed the button, onto a marble vestibule with a concierge desk staffed by a man in a dove-gray suit. The concierge looked up at her. "Good afternoon, madam. I'm here to see Mr. Abernathy." The smallest flicker in his eyes. Not surprise. Acknowledgement. "Of course. May I take your name?" "Vivian Carter." "One moment." He did not pick up a phone. He pressed something under the edge of the desk. A man appeared from a side corridor. Tall, broad-shouldered, maybe 40, in a suit that fit him with the particular precision of suits worn by men who needed to conceal something underneath them. He inclined his head. "Mrs. Carter." "This way, please." She followed him up a staircase of pale green marble, down a hallway lined with old oil paintings, small ones, landscapes, nothing showy, past 2 closed doors, to a 3rd door which he opened for her without knocking. The room beyond was smaller than she had expected. A library or a study. Dark wood. A single tall window with the curtain half drawn. A fireplace, unlit. 2 leather armchairs. A low table between them with a silver tray holding a pot of coffee, 2 cups, a small pitcher of cream, a bowl of sugar cubes, and nothing else. No phones, no papers, no computer, no television. A man was standing at the window with his back to the door. He did not turn around immediately. He let her take him in, she realized later. Let her take in the cut of the jacket, the black of the hair with a fine silver at the temples, the stillness of him, which was not the stillness of a man who was frozen, but the stillness of a man who had, at some point in his life, learned that the most dangerous thing in any room was usually the person who did not move. Then he turned. Dominic Moretti was, she guessed, somewhere in his early 50s. He had the kind of face that looked ordinary at first, and then, the longer you looked at it, less and less so. Straight nose. Dark eyes set deep. A mouth that did not smile. A small scar on the line of his jaw. Old, silver, the kind that had been earned long before he became whoever he was now. He did not look like a movie mafioso. He did not look like a businessman either. He looked, Vivian thought, like a man you would underestimate in a crowded room and regret underestimating in a quiet one. "Mrs. Carter." His voice was lower than she'd expected and had almost no accent at all. "Please, sit." She sat. He did not sit immediately. He walked to the tray, poured coffee into one of the cups, set it on the table in front of her, and said, "Cream? Sugar?" "Black, please." "Good." He poured the 2nd cup and took the chair opposite her. He did not cross his legs. He set his hands on the arms of the chair and looked at her, and for the first 30 seconds or so, he said nothing at all. Vivian had expected to be afraid. She was not afraid. She was something else, alert, very alert. The way she had been once at 19 in a job interview, she had badly needed. Aware of her own breath and the temperature of her hands and the exact position of her shoulders against the leather of the chair. "Mr. Moretti," she said. "Dominic." "Dominic. Elena called me yesterday." He lifted his cup, drank, set it down. "She said you were not what she expected." "What did she expect?" She expected a woman who was coming to me because she was frightened. She said you were not frightened. She said you were angry, but that anger is not the correct word either. She said you were decided. I am. Good. He watched her. Tell me what happened. She told him. She told him about the coat and the receipt and Miss Lane and the Zurich promotion and the green Valentino, and she told him too, because Elena had told her not to lie to him, about the 22 years and the chapel in Newport and the way Gregory had paid for her mother's funeral. She told him about the kiss on Friday night and the way her own body had, for a treacherous second, leaned toward it. She told him about the rose gold charger on the shelf in her husband's closet. She talked for almost 20 minutes, and he did not interrupt her once. He did not make notes. He did not move. Once, when she said something he found interesting, she didn't know what, some small detail. She thought it might have been the detail about the Geneva trip she had not been invited on. His eyes narrowed very slightly and then returned to neutral. When she stopped, he was quiet for what felt like a long time. Then he said, "May I ask you 3 questions, Mrs. Carter?" Vivian, may I ask you 3 questions? Yes. 1. Do you still love your husband? She thought about the kiss, about the dark of the bathroom, about the way she had shaken against the sink. Parts of him, she said. I love parts of him. I love the version of him that existed until about 4 years ago. I do not love the man who signed that receipt. 2. Are you asking me to hurt him physically? No. Are you sure? I don't want him hurt physically. I want him... She paused, searching for the word. She found it. I want him erased, professionally, financially, socially. I want him to walk into a room 3 years from now and have it go quiet, and not because he's feared, because he's finished. The corner of Dominic's mouth moved, not a smile, but something like one. Those are different things, Vivian. A man who is feared has enemies. A man who is finished has nothing. Which do you want? Finished? Good. Is there a 3rd question? Yes. He leaned forward slightly for the first time and set his cup down on the tray. 3. If I help you, and I have not yet said that I will, do you understand that you will not be able to walk back out of this room the same woman who walked in? She took a breath. I don't want to be. He nodded once, slowly. He stood up. He walked to the window and looked down at the street for a moment, hands in his pockets. She watched him and thought, with a distant kind of interest, that he was deciding something and that it was not about her. Then he turned around. Your husband's firm, he said, has been running a series of what are technically called mirrored allocations through a fund in Zurich for the last 26 months. In simple English, your husband's firm has been using client money to take positions, and then, when those positions go well, booking the gains to his personal accounts. When they go badly, booking the losses to the clients. This is not a small thing. This is not a gray area. This is, under federal law and under Swiss banking law, a criminal matter. She sat very still. The woman, Miss Lane, did not start this, but she is the one who currently executes the transfers. She has been for about 9 months. She signs off in Zurich. She is a co-conspirator, whether she understands that word or not, and in the view of the people who will eventually notice this, she will be treated as one. How do you know this? Because one of the clients he is stealing from is a man who is a friend of mine, a friend in a particular way. Mr. Delacroix, an elderly gentleman in Montreal with a private foundation. Your husband has taken roughly $11 million from Mr. Delacroix over the past 2 years. Mr. Delacroix has noticed. Mr. Delacroix called me 9 months ago and asked me whether I thought he should make the matter public. I told him to wait. I told him I had a feeling the situation would clarify itself. He paused. You are the clarification, Vivian. She looked at her hands on the arm of the chair. They were steady. She was vaguely impressed with them. So you already had a reason to ruin him. I had a reason to be patient. There is a difference. Ruining a man like your husband in a way that sticks requires a very particular kind of lever, and the lever I had was not enough on its own. Mr. Delacroix is a private man. He does not want to testify. He does not want his name in the Wall Street Journal. He wants his $11 million back, and he wants the man who took it to be gone from the places where men like them meet. You are a wife of 22 years who has just discovered her husband's infidelity and has grounds to subpoena everything. You are a wife whose name is on the prenuptial agreement, which I have read, and which entitles you, in the event of documented infidelity, to full forensic discovery of marital and business finances. You are a wife who, if she chooses to cooperate with the right people, can walk into a grand jury with standing that no one else at this table has. You've read my prenup. I have. How? Vivian, he looked at her steadily. You do not want to ask me that question. She held his eyes for a moment, then she nodded. All right, good. He walked back to his chair. He sat down. He picked up his coffee. Here is what I am offering you, he said. I will put a team around you, quietly. You will not see them, and your husband will not see them. They will work for 2 weeks. They will confirm, on paper, what I already know about the Zurich Fund, and they will go further. They will find the trail of the affair in a form that is legally usable, and they will build a picture of your husband's personal holdings that is complete enough that when the divorce filing goes in, his lawyers will not be able to hide a coat hanger from you, let alone a brokerage account in the Caymans. All right. At the end of those 2 weeks, we will have a meeting. You and I and a woman named Margaret Holloway, whom I believe you have already spoken to. You know about Margaret. I know about Margaret. Margaret is excellent. Margaret is not enough on her own. You will need Margaret for the divorce, and you will need me for the rest. All right. At that meeting, we will decide together how and when your husband is informed that his life is over. I have a suggestion about the timing. I think we should do it at the Whitmore Foundation Gala on November 18th. She felt something cold run down the back of her neck. Go on. Your husband has made a mistake, Vivian. He has made many mistakes, but this is the one that will kill him. He has decided to use the Whitmore Gala as a soft launch for Miss Lane. He is going to promote her to Zurich, and he is going to have her on his arm, and he is going to introduce her to the room, and he is going to tell himself afterward that nothing was said, that nothing was done, that his wife was gracious, that his reputation is intact. He is going to believe that he has bought himself 6 more months. Yes. I would like to give him a different evening. She looked at him. I would like, Dominic Moretti said, with the first real warmth she had heard in his voice, a warmth that was not, she understood, for her, to give you the pleasure of walking into that ballroom on my arm, with the dress, with the hair, with everything. And I would like for him to see you from across the room, and for the entire room to see you, and for him to understand in the 20 seconds it will take me to cross the floor with you that he is lost. She did not answer immediately. She thought about the green Valentino. She thought about Morella saying, You've lost weight, Mrs. Shaw. She thought about her mother in the vestry in Newport. Not yet. Just walking in, she said carefully, is not enough. No. He needs to know, in that room, in front of those people, that he's finished. Yes. How? Dominic set down his cup again. At approximately 9:15 that evening, he said, a reporter from the Journal who has been working on a story about mirrored allocations at mid-size private funds for the past 7 months will receive, via her editor, a complete and sourced package of documentation on Shaw Capital Partners. By 10 the following morning, your husband will be the lead item on every finance desk in the country. By noon, the SEC will have publicly acknowledged an investigation. By the end of that week, 2 of his 3 banking relationships will have been suspended pending review. And at the gala, he allowed himself, for the first time, the smallest real smile. You and I will simply be there. We will say nothing about any of this. We will dance once, perhaps twice. We will be photographed. The photographs will go out in the morning with the story, and they will make certain that when anyone in that world remembers the night your husband fell, they will remember it as the night his wife walked in with someone else and he realized, in real time, that he was already dead. You want to humiliate him. No, Vivian, I want to document the humiliation. The humiliation is already his. He did it to himself. I want to make sure that the room cannot unsee it. She was quiet for a while. What do you get? She said finally. out of this. Be honest with me. He did not flinch. 3 things, he said. 1. Mr. Delacroix's $11 million, returned in full, which will happen automatically the moment the SEC freezes the accounts and Margaret subpoenas them. I do not need to be named in any of this. I do not want to be named in any of this. Mr. Delacroix is a private man, and so am I. 2. There is a gentleman named Harold Beck. He sits on the board of your husband's firm. He has been, for 3 years, an obstacle to me in a matter that has nothing to do with you. When your husband falls, Mr. Beck's position on that board becomes untenable, and the board will be restructured. I would like Mr. Beck off that board. I do not require him to be prosecuted, merely gone. I don't know Mr. Beck. You don't need to. You only need to say yes to this arrangement. 3. He looked at her for a long moment. 3, he said, is the part of the answer you asked me to be honest about. All right. I spent 24 years, he said slowly, watching my mother wait for my father to come home. My father was a man who did not do what your husband did. He was loyal in his way. I will give him that. But he was cold. He was absent. He was arrogant. He believed that because he provided, he was owed. My mother died at 63 without ever, as far as I know, having a single day in her own life. She went straight from her father's house to my father's house, and she was quiet inside both of them. Chit. He paused. I do not get involved in domestic matters, Vivian. Elena knows this. It is one of my rules. I have broken it perhaps 4 times in 30 years. I am breaking it for you because when Elena described you to me on the phone, I heard my mother in the description. I heard a woman who had been quiet for too long in the wrong house. And then, when you walked into this room, I saw that I was wrong. You are not my mother. You are the woman my mother would have been, if someone had given her a match. He smiled, barely. I would like to give you a match, Vivian. That is the 3rd thing. I would like to watch you burn that house down. She looked at him across the low table for a long time, and she thought, with a clarity that was almost funny in its simplicity, he is dangerous. He is telling me the truth. Both of those things are true at once, and I need to be a grown woman about both of them. Dominic. Yes. I have one condition. Tell me, when this is over, when he's gone, when the firm is broken up, when she's been deposed, when the divorce is final, I do not want to owe you anything. I want us to be even. I want to walk out of this with my own money, my own name, and no quiet obligation sitting in a drawer somewhere with your handwriting on it. He did not answer right away. Then he said, That is not a condition, Vivian. That is a preference. And it is a preference I will honor. But I want you to understand something. The kind of help I am offering you is the kind of help that, in the ordinary course of business, comes with obligations. I am choosing, in this case, not to attach any. I am doing that because I want to, not because you have asked me to. I want you to understand the distinction. Why? Because if I pretended this help was free and you owed me nothing, I would be lying to you. I am not lying to you. I am giving you a gift. Gifts and debts are different things. I would like us to be clear on which this is. She nodded slowly. All right. Are we agreed then? One more thing. Yes. I need to know. She stopped and was a little surprised to find her voice catch just slightly. She steadied it. I need to know that no one is going to get hurt, physically. I mean, my husband, his mistress, his people. I understand what I'm asking you to do. I understand it will ruin him. I want him ruined. I am not... Her mouth went dry. I am not asking anyone to be hurt, not in that way. He looked at her with something close to respect. No one will be hurt, he said. Not in that way. Not by me. Not by anyone in this. You have my word. And your word is worth something, Vivian. Ask Elena. I will. Good. He stood up. She stood up too, a little faster than she'd meant to. He did not offer his hand. He simply nodded once and said, Luca will see you out. You will not come back to this building. If I need to reach you, I will use the prepaid number you used to call Luca. If you need to reach me, you will use the same number. You will not write any of this down. You will not tell Margaret any of the specifics of what we have discussed today. She will find out in the normal course of her work, and it is better if she finds out that way. Do you understand? Tstoit. Yes. Good. We meet again in 2 weeks, same day, same hour. She turned to go. At the door she paused and turned back. He was watching her. Dominic. Yes. Thank you. He did not say, "You're welcome." He did not say, "It is my pleasure." He said very quietly, in the voice he had not used for any of the rest of the conversation, a voice that was not performed at all. Be careful on the way home, Vivian. For the next 2 weeks, be careful. Do not change your routines. Do not argue with him. Do not let him see the match in your hand. All right. If something changes, if he becomes suspicious, if his behavior shifts, if you feel something in that house is wrong, you call Luca before you do anything else. Not Margaret. Me. Do you understand? I understand. Good. Go home, She went home. She sat in the back of Marco's car on the drive out of the city, and she watched the river slide past, and she did not cry, did not shake, did not feel anything she could easily name. What she felt, if she had to put a word on it, was set. The way concrete feels when it has finished setting. No longer wet, no longer soft, no longer shapeable. Decided. Hard. At home, Gregory was in the library with the Saturday papers, a glass of something amber at his elbow. Did you find anything you liked? Not today. Diane is holding one for me to think about. Which one? The Winston Diamond Lavalier, the one with the old cut stones. Vivian, that thing is 340,000. Christ, I said I'd think about it. He laughed. Genuinely, the laugh of a man who had been handed something to tease her about, the laugh of a marriage. Think hard, darling, even for you. I will. She leaned down and kissed the top of his head. He smelled of bourbon and the cedar cologne he had been wearing for 30 years. His, still his, not the other one. She went into the kitchen and she told Beatrice she would be having a salad for dinner, and then she went up to the primary suite and she closed the door and she stood in the middle of the room for a minute with her eyes closed. Be careful, he had said. Do not let him see the match in your hand. She opened her eyes. She walked into the closet. She pulled the green Valentino out of its plastic sleeve. She held it up against herself in the mirror. The column of dark forest green silk, cut deep at the back, meant for a woman who could carry it. She had always been able to carry it. She had only in the past 2 years stopped noticing that she could. She looked at herself in the mirror, at the woman of 48 with her mother's eyes and her own strong hands, and addressed the color of a deep wood in her fingers. She thought, without drama, without theater, 3 weeks. She hung the dress back on its padded hanger. She zipped the plastic sleeve closed, slowly, one tooth at a time. She smoothed the front of it with her palm and turned out the light. In the hallway, downstairs, she could hear Gregory laughing on the phone. That same warm, easy laugh, the one that meant he wanted something from someone. And she could hear Beatrice moving quietly in the kitchen, and she could hear the enormous, expensive, echoing quiet of the house on Ashmere Drive. The house that, for one last little while, she was still going to call home. She went down to dinner. She was gracious. She was kind to her husband. She let him kiss her again at the foot of the stairs when they went up, and she did not shake afterward. Something in her had finished moving. In the dark of the primary suite, in the enormous bed, she lay on her side with her eyes open, and she counted slowly the days. 21, then 20, then 19. She slept. 19 days went down to 12, and 12 went down to 5. And somewhere in there, without her quite noticing when it happened, Vivian Carter stopped being afraid of the sound of her husband's key in the front door. It was the strangest shift. In the first week after the Ellsworth Club, she had flinched, small and involuntary, every time she heard the gate hum or the Bentley tires on the gravel. She had practiced her face in the bathroom mirror in the mornings. A gentle face, a wife's face. Nothing about it readable. And she had wondered, each time she walked down the echoing staircase, whether today would be the day she gave herself away. By the second week, she had stopped practicing. By the third week, she had stopped flinching. By the fourth week, when Gregory's Bentley came up the drive at 7:10 in the evening, Vivian Carter felt something she had not felt in 2 years of marriage. And the word for it, she realized as she stood at the kitchen island slicing an apple with a small black-handled knife, was nothing. Not hatred, not love, not fear. A pure, cool neutral, the way a surgeon must feel, she imagined, walking into the operating theater on a morning when she has done this particular procedure 900 times. Luca had called on the prepaid android exactly 3 times in those 3 weeks. The first call, 8 days after the Ellsworth meeting, was short. The team is in place. Your husband's driver picked up a woman at a building on West 66th at 9:40 on Thursday night. He dropped her at the Pierre at 1:15 on Friday morning. Photographs exist. Please continue as normal. The second call, 12 days in. Our associates in Zurich have confirmed the fund structure. Margaret will receive a clean packet on Monday. Please continue as normal. The third call, 3 days before the gala. Everything is ready. The reporter has the package she is holding pending your instruction. Mr. Moretti would like to see you the night before the event, 7 p.m., same location as before. He will send the car. Each time she had listened, said, "Thank you," and hung up and gone on with her day. She had gone to her Pilates class. She had chaired a subcommittee meeting at the Whitney. She had had lunch with a friend named Harriet Voss and not said a single true sentence for 90 minutes, and Harriet had not noticed. She had had her hair colored. She had allowed her tailor to take the Valentino in a further 1/8 of an inch. She had sat across a dinner table from her husband 4 nights of the week and been, by Gregory's own murmured assessment one evening in the library, "Better than you've been in a year, darling. Are you using a new moisturizer?" "New facialist," she had said, and smiled, and not looked at him too long. He had, in those 3 weeks, been in something close to a good mood about her for the first time in a long time. It was the cruelest part of it. He had decided, somewhere in the back of his head, that his wife was getting her act together, that she had sensed the temperature change in the marriage, and was rising to meet it, putting in the effort, losing the 4 pounds, being sweeter in bed, which she had, twice, made herself do, and had not allowed herself to feel anything about afterward because there was no room in this plan for that kind of feeling. He had begun, once or twice, to look at her across a room with the old attention. She had noted it, the way a bookkeeper notes an irregularity in a ledger, and she had moved on. On the evening of November 17th, the night before the gala, the night Dominic had asked to see her, Vivian told Gregory she was going into the city to meet Elena Ruiz for an early dinner at Elena's gallery, where they were hanging a new Rauschenberg. He nodded without looking up from his phone. "Back by." 10, maybe a little after. Don't wait up. She stood in the mudroom putting on her camel wrap coat, not his, which she had, very quietly, moved to a cedar box in the back of a guest closet the week before, telling Beatrice it needed relining. And for a moment she let herself look at him through the doorway into the kitchen. He was standing at the marble island in shirt sleeves, tie loosened, scrolling on his phone, his face lit blue from below. He looked, in that one unposed second, exactly the way he had looked in their apartment on 78th Street when they were 31 and 39 and had been married 6 years and had stayed up until 2 in the morning eating leftover Thai food and arguing, with actual affection, about whether to put an offer in on the house in Connecticut that they had ended up not buying. She did not know the man he had become. She did know, with a kind of terrible clarity, that the man in the kitchen had once been the other man. She looked at him for about 3 seconds. She let herself feel it. Then she pulled on her gloves and walked out to the car. The room at the Ellsworth Club was the same room, the same curtains, the same tray, the same unlit fireplace. Dominic was already seated when Luca showed her in, which was new. The last time he had let her arrive first and find him standing. Tonight there was a small, low fire in the grate, because the November weather had turned. He stood up when she came in. He did not smile exactly, but his eyes changed when he saw her. It was a small thing. She noted it and did not let herself make anything of it. "Vivian?" "Dominic." "Sit, please. I have asked them to bring tea tonight instead of coffee. I thought it might be gentler." She laughed, a small surprised laugh. "Gentler?" "It is the night before." "Yes." She sat. He poured. The tea was something dark and smoky, and when she took her first sip she realized, with something close to gratitude, that her hands were shaking just slightly. Not from fear, from the long-held togetherness of 3 weeks. The body, she thought, knows what the mind has been pretending about. "You've done well," he said. Luca reports that nothing in your routine has changed. Your husband suspects nothing. He thinks I'm thriving. He is correct. You are. He is simply wrong about why. She set down the cup. Walk me through tomorrow, Dominic, all of it, exactly as it will go. He nodded, as if he had been expecting this. The gala is called for 7. Cocktails to 8:15 in the upper gallery. Dinner at 8:30 in the Astor Ballroom. Remarks and the Foundation's annual award at 9:40. Dancing after 10. Your husband's table is number 4, front center. Miss Lane is seated at table 9 with a group of the firm's junior partners. He has, I am told, arranged for her to be reseated at table 4 for the dessert course, to make her introduction to the room at that point, and to dance with her immediately after his remarks. He is presenting the Foundation's award this year. That is the moment he has built for himself. That is the moment he will not get. Because you and I will walk into that ballroom at precisely 9:20. We will not be on the seating chart. I have made a rather generous last-minute donation to the Whitmore Foundation this afternoon, and we have been accommodated at a small two-top near the windows, next to the Rothmans. Celia Rothman is on the board, you know her, and no one will find it unusual that we are there because my name is known in that room in certain circles, and because you are who you are. Gregory will see me the instant I walk in. Yes. What will he do? Dominic tilted his head slightly. In my experience, a man like your husband, confronted in public with a development he has not planned for, has a very narrow range of options. He cannot cross the room and confront you. The optics would destroy him before his own statement could. He cannot ignore you, because the room will not ignore you. He will, I predict, do the second of the two things he has been trained to do his entire adult life. He will perform. Perform how? He will smile. He will put his hand on Miss Lane's back a little too possessively. He will make a joke to the men at his table. He will, approximately 15 minutes after our entrance, send someone across the room, probably one of his partners, perhaps Harold Beck if Beck is feeling brave, to say hello to you, to see whether you have come to make a scene. What do I do? You smile, you are cordial, you do not engage. You say, please tell Gregory I hope he has a wonderful evening. You do not use the word husband, you use his name. That alone will travel across the room in 90 seconds. She let out a breath. At 9:40, Dominic went on, your husband will take the stage to present the Foundation's award. He will give his prepared remarks. He is a competent speaker. They will be fine. The room will applaud politely. During his remarks, at approximately 9:43, the reporter from the Journal, Sarah Lynn, her name is, remember it, will publish. The story will break on the Journal website and be pushed to Bloomberg simultaneously by prior arrangement with her editor. Within 6 minutes, a certain number of phones in that ballroom will begin to vibrate. Within 10 minutes, someone at table 3 will know. Within 15, half the room will know. By the time dessert arrives, the entire ballroom will know, and your husband, on stage or newly returned to his seat, will be the last person in the room to understand that his life is on fire. She closed her eyes for a second. And me? You, said Dominic, will be dancing with me at that point. You will be in the middle of the floor. You will not look at your phone. You will not look across the room. You will simply dance. People will photograph us. Yes. I will be, in those photographs, a woman dancing with a strange man on the night her husband's firm collapsed. You will be, in those photographs, a woman who already knew. A woman who had already decided. A woman who was already dancing with someone else by the time the music on her husband's side of the room stopped. That is the image I want out of that ballroom, Vivian. That is the image the world needs to see. She opened her eyes. It's cruel. Yes. He did it first. Yes. All right. They sat in silence for a long moment. The fire popped once, softly. Dominic. Yes. May I ask you something personal? You may ask. I may not answer. Your mother. He looked at her. You said she was quiet in the wrong house. Did she know? At the end, he was silent for a long time. Long enough that she thought he was going to decline to answer. Then he said very quietly, at the end, yes. She knew. My father outlived her by 4 years. He was, for those 4 years, the loneliest man I have ever seen. I did not visit him. He wrote to me twice. I did not answer. When he died, I went to the funeral because I am not the kind of man who skips his father's funeral, and I did not cry. I was 31 years old. I'm sorry. Do not be sorry for me, Vivian. I am telling you because I want you to understand that what I am doing tomorrow is not a kindness. A kindness would be to have done this 30 years ago for a different woman. I am only making sure that a version of that story ends, this time, the way it should have ended the first time. She looked at him. He was looking at the fire. She said, I'm not her, you know. I'm not your mother. I don't need to be rescued. I know. I'm doing this myself. I know that too, Vivian. I am only... And here he did, finally, allow her the smallest real smile. Holding the match. She almost laughed. Instead, she reached across the low table and, for the first time, touched his hand. Just a second. The back of it, cool, scarred near the knuckle with another old thin silver line that matched the one on his jaw. She touched it and withdrew. Tomorrow, she said. Tomorrow. She went home. Gregory was still up. He was in the library with a brandy, watching highlights of a football game he did not care about, which meant he was waiting for her, which meant he had something on his mind. Back earlier than you said. Elena's taxi driver got us back to the gallery by 9. The Rauschenberg? A small one. Not her best. He swirled his glass. He was looking at the television, not at her. Darling. Yes. Tomorrow night, I want to go over the logistics with you one more time, the timing of the announcement, about Celeste's promotion. I want to make sure we're on the same page. Of course. She sat across from him in the green velvet chair. She crossed her legs. She looked at him with the expression of a wife who is willing and available to be useful to her husband. I'm going to make the announcement during dessert, he said, before I take the stage for the Whitmore Award. I think it lands better if the room has a glass of champagne in their hand. It'll be brief. A paragraph, 2. Then I go up and do the Whitmore thing. Celeste will be at our table by then. I'd like you to... He paused, choosing the word. Welcome her, warmly. A small hand on her shoulder when she sits down. That sort of thing. It matters that the room sees us. The firm, as a family. Vivian smiled. Of course, darling. You're sure you're... Gregory. She tilted her head. Did you think I'd be difficult about this? No, of course not. He looked at her finally. His eyes were tired. His eyes were, she realized, a little afraid. Not of her. Of something else. Of the way the evening might go, she thought. Of what he had orchestrated. Of his own appetite for Miss Lane. Of his own cleverness, which had never in 22 years of watching him been quite as clever as he believed it to be. I just want us to be aligned, he said. We've been aligned for 22 years, Gregory. She stood up. She kissed him on the forehead. Wear the navy, not the charcoal. The charcoal washes you out under those chandeliers. The navy. Yes, he smiled. It was a boyish smile, the one he used to give her when they were 32, and she had corrected him on something small at a dinner party, and it struck her, for the second time that night, with a weight she had not expected. Where would I be without you, Viv? I've wondered. What? Nothing. She smiled. Don't stay up too late. She went upstairs. She did not sleep well. She did not expect to. The morning of November 18th was gray and cold, with a low steel sky over Ashmere Drive that threatened rain and did not deliver. Vivian woke at 6. She lay for a long time in the bed, looking at the ceiling. Then she got up and went downstairs in her robe, and Beatrice, who had been in the kitchen since 5:30, poured her a coffee without being asked. You have the gala tonight, ma'am. Yes. Beatrice did not meet her eyes. Beatrice was setting out the breakfast plates very carefully. B. Yes, Mrs. Shaw. Come here. Beatrice came around the island. She was smaller than Vivian and solid, and her gray braid was already pinned up for the day. Vivian did something she had not done in 11 years. She took Beatrice's hand. She held it for a moment. B, I want to tell you something. I'm not going to tell you anything else, so please don't ask. I just want you to know that you have been, for a very long time, a good friend to me. Not an employee. A friend. I'm not sure I've said that properly before. Beatrice's eyes filled at once. in the quick way of women who do not cry easily, but who know exactly when something has changed. Ma'am, let me finish. Today is going to be a long day. If in the next week or so, some things in this house change, if I'm not here for a while, if Mr. Shaw is very upset, if strangers come to the door, I want you to know that you are safe. Your position is safe. I have already spoken to Margaret Holloway, who is my attorney, and your employment is protected for the next 12 months at minimum, through me personally, whatever happens to Mr. Shaw. You do not work for him anymore. As of this morning, you work for me. Do you understand? Beatrice was crying quietly. Si, Mrs. Shaw. And Bia. Yes, ma'am. Thank you for everything, for 11 years, for the eggs the way I like them, for not telling me things you saw, and for not telling him either. Beatrice nodded. She couldn't speak. Vivian squeezed her hand once and let it go, and drank her coffee, and went upstairs to run a bath. The day passed slowly. She had her hair done at 2, nails at 3, makeup artist at 4:30. A woman named Simone, who had been doing Vivian's face for the important nights for 6 years, and who was, within 10 minutes, staring at her client in the mirror in a way that had nothing to do with the eyeshadow. Mrs. Shaw. Yes, Simone. You look different tonight. Do I? Simone studied her, brush suspended. You look like you already did it, whatever it is. Vivian smiled into the mirror. Less eyeliner on the bottom, Simone. Let the dress do the work. At 6:15, she put on the green Valentino. It hung on her exactly the way she had wanted it to hang. The color was deep and still and serious. Not the green of spring, the green of a forest at the very end of autumn, when everything underneath has already begun to turn. At the back, the cut was deeper than she had worn in years, and her shoulders, which had always been her best feature, rose from it clean and bare. She had no necklace. That had been deliberate. She wore only her mother's small diamond studs, which her mother had worn on her wedding day to a lighting wholesaler she had loved for 41 years, and which Vivian had kept in a velvet pouch for 3 decades without ever putting them on. She put them on. She looked at herself in the long mirror in the primary suite. She was 48. She did not look 25. She did not want to look 25. She looked exactly like a woman who had lived 22 years of a life that someone else had authored and who had just finally picked up the pen. Gregory knocked on the door at 6:40. Viv, we should go. He pushed the door open. He stopped. She turned. He looked at her. For about 3 seconds, he did not speak. It was, she realized later, the longest he had looked at her properly in 4 years. Then he said softly, My God, Vivian. Gregory, you look, I know. He laughed, a little uncertainly. What did you do? Nothing, darling. I lost 4 pounds and I wore the dress. You look about 35. I look 48. You haven't been paying attention. He laughed again. He didn't know what she meant. He was looking at her the way he had looked at her in the chapel in Newport. Not exactly, but close enough. And for one last thin, dangerous instant, she felt the old want for him try to rise in her like a small, tired animal. And she let it come. And she let it go. Let's not be late, she said. Well, the Astor Ballroom of the Whitmore Hotel held 800 people at full capacity. And on that Tuesday night, it held 612 of the people Gregory Shaw had spent his life needing to impress. Vivian walked in on Gregory's arm at 7:06, and the room did at once the small ripple that rooms did around her when she was at her best. People looked up. Conversations paused for a half-second. Celia Rothman, from across the cocktail space, raised her glass. Gregory felt it. She could tell he felt it, because his grip on her elbow tightened by a small, pleased fraction, and because he said, low in her ear, You've still got it, Viv. They did the circuit, the board members, the donors, the foundation president, the second-tier celebrities whose presence Whitmore bought each year. Vivian was luminous. She was charming. She was funny. She was, for the first hour, better than she had been at any gala in the past 5 years. And Gregory walked beside her as if he were discovering a new acquisition in his own living room. At 8:30, they sat at table 4, front and center, and she let him hold her chair for her, and she let the waiter pour her a glass of white burgundy she did not drink. Celeste Lane was, as Dominic had predicted, seated at table 9, visible across the room, wearing a pale blush gown and laughing a little too brightly at something one of the junior partners was saying. Vivian looked at her exactly once, a soft, assessing look, the look of a wife who was being a good sport. And then she did not look again. Salad came. Soup came. Fish came. Vivian ate almost nothing. She realized, running a clock in her head. At 9:17, she excused herself to the ladies' room. At 9:19, she was in the lobby of the Whitmore Hotel, being handed her small evening bag by a woman who had been waiting for her in the cloakroom, which was a woman she had never seen before, and who did not speak to her and whose name she suspected was not important. At 9:20, Dominic Moretti entered the lobby from Fifth Avenue. He was in black tie. His hair was brushed back. He was alone. He walked the way he walked, without apparent hurry, without ceremony. And when he reached her, he stopped about 3 feet away and looked at her for a moment the way he had looked at her in the room at the Ellsworth Club, which was to say, the way a man looks at something he respects. "Vivian." "Dominic." "You are ready?" "Yes." He offered her his arm. She took it. They walked together into the Astor Ballroom at 9:21, and the room, which had not yet noticed them, began, table by table, in that slow, inevitable way a wave gathers along a shoreline, to go quiet. Vivian felt it happen. She did not look around. She looked straight ahead, at the little two-top by the windows where Celia Rothman was already turning around in her chair, mouth slightly open. She walked with Dominic at a completely ordinary pace. She was not hurrying. She was not pausing. She was simply crossing a room. Gregory saw her. She felt it before she saw him. She felt the moment his eyes found them, the way you feel a light turn on in a dark house. He was 3/4 of the way through a conversation with a donor named Pritchard, and his face, which had been animated and warm, went, in the space of one breath, completely still. His mouth stayed slightly open. His hand, which had been on his wine glass, lifted 1/2 inch off the table and stopped there. Across the room, Celeste Lane had just stood up. She had been about to walk toward table 4. She was about to be promoted. She was about to be introduced. She stopped. She looked at Vivian. She looked at the man on Vivian's arm. She looked at Gregory's face. And Celeste Lane, who was 29 years old and had been sleeping with Gregory Shaw for 19 months and had believed, until approximately that second, that she was about to become the second Mrs. Shaw, sat back down in her chair at table 9 so slowly that it looked, from across the room, like a woman lowering herself into cold water. Vivian did not look at any of them. She walked, with Dominic, to the little two-top by the windows. He pulled out her chair. She sat. He sat opposite her. The ballroom was, around them, beginning to function again. Conversations restarting, forks lifting, the string quartet on the dais shifting into the second movement of something dignified. But underneath the surface of the room, Vivian could feel it. The electricity of 612 people in evening dress all, simultaneously, pretending they had not just seen what they had just seen, and all, simultaneously, about to start whispering. Dominic watched her across the small table. "How do you feel?" he asked quietly. She considered it. "Awake," she said. He smiled, just barely. "Good." A waiter appeared. Dominic ordered 2 glasses of a Pauillac. The ballroom moved on, superficially, around them. Vivian did not look toward table 4. She did not need to. She could feel Gregory's attention on her now, the way she had felt his inattention for 4 years, as a constant weather, a pressure against the back of her neck. He was, she knew, frantically trying to read the situation. He was, she knew, making calculations. He was, she knew, fundamentally incapable of crossing the room and asking her what she was doing here, because Gregory Shaw's entire public life was built on never, under any circumstances, appearing out of control. At 9:29, as Dominic had predicted, Harold Beck appeared at her elbow. Harold Beck was 63, beefy, with a ruddy face and the particular kind of smile that men who have never, in their entire lives, been told no wear into public rooms. He laid a heavy hand on the back of her chair. He leaned down. "Vivian, sweetheart, a word." She turned her head slightly. "Harold." "What in the hell are you doing?" "I'm having a glass of wine, Harold." "Don't." "I'm having a glass of wine at the Whitmore Gala, which I have attended every year for 11 years. This is Mr. Moretti, Dominic." Dominic, this is Harold Beck, one of my husband's colleagues. Harold, Mr. Moretti. Dominic did not stand. He did not offer his hand. He looked up at Harold Beck with an expression that was not quite hostile and was not quite anything else either, and he said very pleasantly, Mr. Beck, I believe we know people in common. Harold Beck's ruddy face went a shade paler. He did know people in common. He knew, in fact, exactly which people in common, and he knew what it meant that Dominic Moretti was sitting at a two-top at the Whitmore Gala with Gregory Shaw's wife on a Tuesday evening in November. And Harold Beck, for all his faults, had not become a 63-year-old board member of a $3.5 billion fund by being slow. He removed his hand from the back of Vivian's chair. Vivian, he said more quietly, please, come back to the table. No, thank you, Harold. He's your husband. Tell Gregory I hope he has a wonderful evening. Harold Beck looked at her. He looked at Dominic. He looked for a long second across the room at Gregory, who was watching them with the rigid composure of a man who had, approximately 90 seconds earlier, understood that something was happening that he did not understand. Then Harold Beck turned and walked back across the ballroom without saying another word. He's a clever man, actually, Dominic said mildly when Harold was out of earshot. He has just understood something it will take the rest of this room another 40 minutes to understand. What has he understood? He has understood that he is going to be on a different board by Christmas. She laughed. It surprised her. A small, sharp laugh. Dominic smiled at her across the table. The first real, unguarded smile she had seen from him, and lifted his glass. To an interesting evening, Vivian. To an interesting evening. At 9:40, Gregory Shaw took the stage to present the Whitmore Foundation's annual Philanthropy Award. He was, she had to admit, good. He was composed. He smiled in the right places. He made the right small joke about the hotel's lighting. He did not once look at table by the window where his wife was sitting with a man whose name he did not, at that moment, yet know. At 9:43, all across the ballroom, phones began, very softly, to buzz. It started at table 2, where a hedge fund manager named Rennick received a Bloomberg alert and frowned down at his screen. Then table 7, where a financial journalist named Yolanda Kim, who had not been given the story because she worked for a competitor of Sarah Lynn's and was therefore now receiving the story the hard way, raised her eyebrows and reached, very quickly, for her clutch. Then table 9, where one of the junior partners sitting next to Celeste Lane looked down at his phone and went, very visibly, the color of skim milk. On stage, Gregory was saying something about the importance of giving back. Dominic stood up and held out his hand to Vivian. Would you like to dance? He said. Yes. They walked to the floor. The string quartet was playing something slow and wordless that Vivian did not recognize. Dominic put his hand lightly at the small of her back and took her right hand in his left. He danced the way he walked, without apparent effort, without flourish. He did not pull her close. He did not need to. Across the ballroom on stage, Gregory Shaw was finishing his remarks about philanthropy. A man at table 3 stood up abruptly and walked, half running, out of the ballroom with his phone pressed to his ear. Dominic turned her very slightly so that she could see the stage over his shoulder without obviously looking. Gregory, smiling, said, "And so it is my great pleasure." He stopped. He had, she saw, just glanced down at the foundation president sitting in the front row, and the foundation president was looking at her phone. And the foundation president's face was doing a thing that faces do only when something very, very bad has just happened in public. Gregory Shaw looked out into the ballroom. He saw his wife, in forest green, dancing. He saw at the edges of his vision dozens of faces looking down at dozens of phones. He saw, at table 9, Celeste Lane staring at her own phone with her mouth slightly open. He saw, and Vivian would remember this for the rest of her life, would remember it with a precision that surprised her when she thought about it later, the exact moment her husband understood. His face did not break. He was too trained for that. But something behind his eyes went out. A light. A long-running machine. Something that had been on for 30 years of a career simply, quietly, turned off, and in its place was a 44-year-old boy from a small town in Ohio who had, at some point in the past 22 years, forgotten that he had ever been that boy, and who was, for one unprotected second, in the Astor Ballroom of the Whitmore Hotel, nobody's husband and nobody's boss and nobody's myth, He finished the sentence somehow. To present this year's Whitmore Foundation Award. Someone in the back of the room coughed. It sounded, in the quieting ballroom, like a gunshot. Gregory read the name off the card. The recipient stood up. The room applauded, a beat late, a beat soft. Gregory handed over the award. He shook the hand. He smiled. He walked off the stage. He did not return to table 4. He walked, at a pace that was not quite running, out through the side door of the ballroom, and he took his phone out of his pocket as he walked, and by the time the side door closed behind him, the first full breath of uproar was rising in the ballroom like a tide. Dominic, dancing, said very quietly to Vivian, "It's done." "Yes." "Are you all right?" "Yes." "You're crying." She had not realized. She touched her cheek with the hand that was not in his. Her fingertip came away wet. She looked at it with a kind of mild interest. "I don't know why," she said. "Yes, you do." She looked up at him. 22 years, she said. "Yes." "He was the man who paid for my mother's funeral." "Yes." "He was." "Yes, Vivian. He was. And then he was not." She nodded. She did not wipe the tear. She let it go. She kept dancing. Across the ballroom, the tide of uproar rose and rose. A photographer she had not noticed earlier raised his camera from the edge of the dance floor and took 3 quick frames of them. And in the morning, those 3 frames would go, with Sarah Lynn's byline, to every major financial desk in the country. And in one of them, the one that would run the largest above the fold, on the Journal website for 11 hours, Vivian Carter would be looking up into Dominic Moretti's face with a single tear still on her cheek, and her mouth would be set in a line that was neither a smile nor a frown, but something harder and more precise. And the headline would read simply, "Shaw Capital under federal investigation. Founder's future in doubt." But that was the morning. This was still the night. The music was still playing. Her husband was outside the ballroom on a telephone, beginning to learn the shape of what had happened to him. A 29-year-old woman in a blush gown at table 9 was beginning to understand that she was not being promoted to Zurich. Harold Beck was beginning, already, to compose the 3 careful phone calls he would make in the morning. And in the middle of the floor, in a forest green dress, in the arms of a man she had known for exactly 24 days, Vivian Carter danced. She danced for one more song, and then Dominic, without any visible signal, led her off the floor toward the side exit through which 2 of his men—she had not seen them arrive, she had not, in fact, known they were there—were already holding a door open. The lobby was a different country from the ballroom. In the ballroom, people were pretending not to look at their phones. In the lobby, they had given up pretending. A cluster of men in black tie were standing by the coat check with their phones held at the angle of men reading something they could not quite believe. And one of them, a partner from a rival firm named Orrin Shelby, looked up as she passed and did not say hello. He only, very slightly, inclined his head, the kind of nod men gave each other at funerals, and returned to his screen. Dominic's driver was waiting on Fifth Avenue, a black Mercedes, not ostentatious. Luca was in the front seat. Dominic opened the rear door for her himself. "Where are we going?" Vivian asked as she got in. "Wherever you want." "Not home." "No, not home tonight." "Then I have a suite at the Pierre under Margaret Holloway's name. She reserved it this afternoon for you. There are clothes there. There are toiletries. There's a nurse on call if you want one, and there is a bottle of very good whiskey if you want that instead. Margaret is meeting us in the lobby." "You thought of everything." "No," he said, and he was looking out the side window as he said it, not at her. "Margaret thought of most of it. I only asked that you not be alone tonight in any room in that house on Ashmere Drive." She watched his profile in the moving light of Fifth Avenue. "Dominic." "Yes." "Will he come home tonight?" "No. His lawyer will tell him not to. His lawyer will have already told him not to. He will go to the apartment on West 66th. His lawyer will not tell him to go there either, but he will go there anyway, because men in shock go to the places where they have recently felt powerful. He will find that Miss Lane is not there. Miss Lane is, at this moment, on a plane to her parents' house in Phoenix, because one of my people advised her, 3 hours ago, that Phoenix would be a healthier climate for her in the short term than Manhattan. You. She is not a subject of the federal investigation tonight, Vivian. She will be by tomorrow afternoon on paper and by the end of the week in earnest. I did not want her in that ballroom when the story broke. It would have turned the photographs into a different kind of photograph. This evening was not about her. Vivian looked at her hands in her lap. The mother's diamond studs felt warm behind her ears. Dominic. Yes. I don't want her destroyed. He turned his head slowly and looked at her. She's 29 years old, Vivian said. She made a terrible choice. She is going to pay for it for the rest of her career, and I'm not going to pretend to be sorry about that. But I don't want her erased. I want her to have a life afterward. I want her to be able to put gas in a car somewhere in 10 years. Do you understand what I'm saying? He considered her for a long time. Yes, he said. Can that happen? Is that something you can do? It is something I can do. She will be deposed. She will lose her license to work in finance in this country. She will not, if I have any say in the matter, be charged criminally beyond the deposition. She will go home to Phoenix. She will, in 3 years, be selling real estate in Scottsdale under a different last name, and she will never, for the rest of her life, work in a building with a view of Central Park again. Is that acceptable to you? Yes. Good. She exhaled a long, shaky breath she had not known she was holding. Vivian, yes. You are a very strange kind of woman, she laughed tiredly. Is that good or bad? It is the reason I broke my rule. Margaret Holloway was in the lobby of the Pierre in a black pantsuit and reading glasses pushed up into her hair. And when she saw Vivian, she opened her arms without speaking, and Vivian, who had not planned to, walked into them and let herself be held for about 30 seconds by a woman she had known on and off for 6 years and had, in truth, never been close to until that moment. You did good, sweetheart, Margaret said into her hair. Did I? You did good. She stepped back and looked Vivian over. The dress, the studs, the slight smear of mascara under her right eye that Simone would have been horrified about, and nodded once, a short, decisive nod, and said, All right, upstairs. Dominic, are you coming up? No, he said. She's had enough of me tonight. I haven't, Vivian said, before she quite meant to. He looked at her. I'll come up for 10 minutes, he said. Then I'm going home. You need to be with Margaret tonight, not me. They went up. The suite was on a high floor, looking east over the park. Margaret had been thorough. There were soft clothes in the closet in Vivian's size. There was a plate of sandwiches under a silver cover on the coffee table. There was a bottle of Yamazaki with 2 clean tumblers. There was a phone charger still in its package. And because Margaret Holloway had been doing this for 31 years and knew what women who had just detonated their own marriages actually needed. There was a hot water bottle, already warm, wrapped in a cashmere throw on the bed. Vivian saw the hot water bottle and, for reasons she could not name, started crying. Not hard. Just a steady leak. She sat down on the edge of the bed in the Valentino and cried quietly for about a minute and a half, and Margaret sat down next to her and did not say anything, and Dominic stood in the doorway with his hands in his pockets and did not say anything either. And outside the windows, Manhattan went on being Manhattan, oblivious. When she stopped, Margaret handed her a tissue from a box on the nightstand, which was a brand of tissue Vivian did not keep in her own house, and Vivian almost laughed. Okay, she said. Okay. Okay, Margaret said. Dominic from the doorway said, Vivian. Yes. Tomorrow morning at 9, a man named Arthur Petrillo will come to this room. He is Margaret's associate. He will take a statement from you for the record. That statement will be the foundation of the divorce filing, which Margaret will submit at 11. By noon tomorrow, your husband will officially know, through the proper channels, not through a phone call at 2 a.m., that he is being divorced. Do not call him. Do not answer if he calls you. Do not look at social media. Do not read the journal piece until Margaret has gone over it with you. Eat something. Sleep if you can. That is all you have to do tomorrow. Is that clear? Yes. Good. Margaret. Dominic. Thank you for being here. Thank you for making the call. He nodded at Margaret. He looked at Vivian one more time, a long, steady look, the kind he had given her across the low table at the Ellsworth Club, and then he closed the door softly behind him. Margaret sat down next to her on the bed. Well, she said, hell of a Tuesday. Vivian laughed. It was a wet laugh, and it startled her, and she laughed again because the first laugh had been so unexpected. I danced with him, Margaret. I saw the photographs. They're already up. Already? Honey, you danced with a man whose name makes half of Wall Street go quiet. Of course they're already up. You're trending. Don't look at it. I won't. Promise me. I promise. Drink something. I'm wearing Valentino. Take the Valentino off. I had Bergdorf send pajamas. Vivian stood up. She let Margaret help her with the zip in the back of the dress, a zip she had, for 3 weeks, assumed would be unzipped in her own closet at Ashmere Drive by Beatrice the following morning, and which was, instead, being unzipped by a divorce attorney in a hotel suite on East 61st Street. And she stepped out of the column of forest green and laid it carefully across the bench at the foot of the bed. The pajamas were soft. The hot water bottle went against her stomach. Margaret poured her an inch of the Yamazaki and put it in her hand. Drink. Margaret. Drink. She drank. The whiskey hit her like a small, warm, practical animal, and she closed her eyes and leaned back against the headboard. What happens now? She said, not opening her eyes. Now? Now. Now, Margaret said. He gets a lawyer. The lawyer tells him to say nothing. He says nothing. I file in the morning. The firm's compliance committee is already, as of about 15 minutes ago, holding an emergency meeting. The SEC sent its formal letter to Shaw Capital's general counsel at 9:50 tonight. Dominic made sure of the timing. Which means by the time your husband called his lawyer from the side exit of the Whitmore, his lawyer already had the letter in his inbox. The 2 banking relationships that have been flagging his firm for 9 months will pull the line of credit by noon tomorrow. The 3rd one will pull by Friday, because the 3rd one is always a coward and waits to see what the first 2 do. By Monday, there will be no Shaw Capital Partners, Vivian. There will be a wind-down firm with a different name and a court-appointed monitor, and a lot of very expensive men in very expensive suits trying to salvage what they can salvage. And Gregory, Margaret said. And she was not being unkind. Margaret was never unkind. Margaret simply spoke the truth of things in the voice a doctor uses to give a prognosis. Is done, sweetheart. He is not going to prison. I don't think. Dominic's people have structured this so the civil exposure is catastrophic, but the criminal exposure is thin. He will settle. He will pay. He will lose his license to manage money in this country. He will live, in 5 years, somewhere that is not Manhattan, on something that is not his old income, and he will tell a version of this story to whoever will listen that will be 60% self-pity and 40% lies and 0% insight. That sounds about right. Vivian opened her eyes. Margaret. Am I a bad person? Margaret looked at her for a long time. Then she reached over and took the tumbler out of Vivian's hand, set it on the nightstand, and took both of Vivian's hands in her own. Sweetheart, she said, let me tell you something, and I'm going to say it only once, because I have been doing this for 31 years, and because I like you. You did not destroy your husband. Your husband destroyed your husband. He did it over 24 months of stealing from a client in Montreal. He did it over 19 months of sleeping with a 29-year-old and expensing dinners in your family name. He did it the day he decided to announce that girl's promotion at the Whitmore Gala and ask you to put your hand on her shoulder. You did not do any of that. You simply, finally, stopped cleaning up after him. That is not the same thing as destroying a man. Do you understand the difference? Yes. Say it back to me. I did not destroy him. I stopped cleaning up after him. Again. I stopped cleaning up after him. Good girl. Now drink the rest of that whiskey and eat half of a sandwich and go to sleep, because Arthur Petrillo is ringing this doorbell at 9 on the dot, and he is extremely boring, and you need to be lucid for him. Vivian laughed again. She ate half a sandwich. She drank the rest of the whiskey. She lay down and pulled the cashmere throw over her knees, and at some point around 11:30, with Margaret sitting in the armchair by the window reading something on her phone and occasionally making small disapproving noises at whatever she was reading, Vivian fell asleep for the first time in 3 weeks without counting a single day in her head before she did. Arthur Petrillo did ring the doorbell at 9 on the dot. He was a small, neat man in his 40s with rimless glasses and a briefcase that closed with the soft, expensive click of briefcases that had been bought in London. He shook her hand. He accepted a cup of coffee from the room service cart. He set up a small audio recorder on the coffee table, and for the next 3 hours and 40 minutes, he walked Vivian Carter through a sworn statement that covered 22 years of her marriage. Every social event she could remember from the past 4, every phone call from Gregory she had considered unusual, the precise morning she had found the receipt, the precise language of the handwritten sommelier note, the existence of the rose gold phone charger, the location of the prepaid Android in her lingerie drawer, the name of the Winston saleswoman, the name of Elena Ruiz, the name of Dominic Moretti. For the record, Mrs. Carter, you are stating that you were introduced to Mr. Moretti through a mutual acquaintance, and that your communication with him pertains only to personal matters related to the dissolution of your marriage? Yes, Mr. Petrillo. Thank you. And every detail, large and small, of the night before. At 12:45, Margaret Holloway filed the divorce papers in New York County. At 12:53, an assistant at the Shaw Capital Partners legal team was informed of the filing. At 1:06, Gregory Shaw, sitting on a chintz sofa in the apartment on West 66th Street that he owned through a shell corporation Miss Lane had been staying in for the better part of a year, received the news from his attorney, a man named Roderick Kyle, and said, on a recorded line that Roderick Kyle had not told him was recorded, a sentence that Margaret would later quote to Vivian with a small, ferocious smile, which was, "That bitch knew, said." Margaret said to Vivian, sitting on the edge of the hotel bed at 2 in the afternoon, "He's decided you planned it. He's not wrong." No, but the interesting part is the word. The word. Bitch. 22 years, and that's what came out first. Honey, that is not a marriage he's mourning. That is a position he's mourning. Remember that the next time you feel guilty. I'll remember. Good. He called her that evening. She had not expected him to call her. She had expected his lawyer to call her lawyer, which had, in fact, already happened 3 times. But at 7:15 on the evening of November 19th, the iPhone she had left, out of pure habit, on the nightstand began to buzz, and the screen said Gregory. And Vivian looked at it for a long moment, and Margaret, who was still in the armchair, because Margaret was apparently never going to leave this suite, said, "Don't. I want to." Vivian, I am your attorney, and I am telling you. I know what you're telling me. I want to. Then put it on speaker. She put it on speaker. She picked up. "Hello, Gregory." There was a silence on the other end. A breath. He was in a room, she could tell. A carpeted room, one with curtains, because there was no echo. Viv. "Hello." He stopped. He made a small sound that was almost a laugh, except it wasn't. "I don't know what to call you. Vivian is fine. Vivian has always been fine." Viv. He was crying, she realized, or something close to crying. Gregory Shaw, who had not cried at his own mother's funeral in 2014, was audibly, quietly, uncontrollably crying on a Wednesday evening into a telephone in an apartment on West 66th. "Viv, I need to understand what happened." "No, you don't." "What?" "You don't need to understand what happened, Gregory. You already understand. You're just hoping I'll tell you a version of it that is kinder to you than the version you already have in your head. I'm not going to do that. I don't feel like doing that tonight." "Who is he?" "Who is who?" Don't do this, Viv. The man. At the gala." "Why do you want to know?" "Because he—" Gregory's voice cracked. It actually cracked. "Because he burned my life down, Vivian. Because he came into a room I built, and he put his hand on my wife's back, and he—" "I beg your pardon." "What?" "I beg your pardon, Gregory. Say that again. He did what?" "He put his hand on—" "No, before that. He came into a room you built." Silence. "Gregory, you did not build that ballroom. You did not build the Whitmore Foundation. You did not build our marriage. I built our marriage. I sat at 611 dinners next to men whose first names I made myself learn because you told me their wives were tedious. I ran the Whitney subcommittee for 4 years because it mattered to your firm. I raised your mother's estate paperwork from the dead when she died because you couldn't bring yourself to sit in a lawyer's office in Akron for 2 days. I did all of that, and you watched me do it, and you came to believe that it was air, that it was weather, that it was simply the background of a life you had personally constructed. And then, when you found a 29-year-old who laughed at your jokes, you decided to swap me out like an old phone, and you thought I would take the prenup and go quietly, because that was what you had trained me to be. You did not build anything in that ballroom, Gregory. You occupied it. There is a difference. You are learning the difference. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, and his voice had gone flat, which was, she realized, the first honest thing he had done on the call. Is that what you really think of me? That is what I know about you, Gregory. Thinking has nothing to do with it. I loved you. Parts of me. What? You loved parts of me. For a while. I've thought about it. I've been thinking about it for 3 weeks. I think you loved, for about 9 years, the part of me that made you look good. I think you loved, for about 3 years after that, the part of me that didn't ask you any hard questions. I think you loved, at the very beginning, the part of me that was impressed by you. Because you were, at 26, a genuinely impressive person. That part you loved longest. But you did not, in any serious or complete sense, love me. I know because if you had, you would not have been able to do what you did. So don't use that word at me tonight. You don't have it to spend. Viv, please. What? I can fix this. No. I have people. There are ways. Moretti, whoever he is, he can be... We can settle. I can make him go away. Viv, you don't know what you've gotten mixed up in. That man is dangerous. Do you understand what kind of man that is? She almost laughed. She actually almost laughed out loud. Margaret, across the room, mouthed, "Do not," and Vivian shook her head, small, and pressed her free hand to her forehead. Gregory? Yes. That man is the reason your firm was a federal matter on Monday morning instead of a front-page story on Tuesday night. That man is the reason you are having this phone call in a borrowed apartment instead of in handcuffs. That man listened to me describe 22 years of my life 3 weeks ago, and he said, at the end of it, I will help you, and he has not asked me for a single thing in return, not one. So when you tell me he's dangerous, I believe you. He is, but he has been, in the last 4 weeks, the least dangerous man in my life. Do you understand what I am telling you? Gregory was silent for about 8 seconds. Then he said, very quietly, You planned it. Yes. All of it. Yes. The way you've been with me, the last 3 weeks, the kiss on Friday, you planned. I planned all of it, Gregory. Every night, every dinner, every small hand on the small of your back. It was not enjoyable for me. I'm not telling you it was. I'm telling you it was what you had taught me, over 4 years, to become. You trained a wife to stop asking questions and to be gracious at the dinner table and to wear a green dress on command, and then you were surprised when she turned out to be very good at exactly those things the week she decided to leave you. I don't know what else to say to you about this. You sound like a stranger. Yes. You sound like... You don't sound like you. Gregory, this is what I sound like. You have just, for the first time in 15 years, been in a conversation with your actual wife. I'm sorry you don't recognize me. I'm sorrier for myself, for a lot of reasons, but I am genuinely a little sorry for you too. This is the voice you married. You stopped listening to it. That was a choice. Viv. Yes. What do you want? I want the house. I want the Gestad apartment. I want the Turks and Keiko's property. I want 45% of the liquid assets. I want the share of the firm that the prenup entitles me to, which becomes, under the documented infidelity clause you personally insisted on inserting in 2003, 60% instead of 30%. I want Beatrice's employment protected through me for 3 years. I want the paintings in the library, not the Russia, which you bought before we were married, but the 2 Agnes Martins and the small Mitchell, which you bought with my money, because in 2011 I was the one earning and you were in between funds. I want my mother's earrings, which you will find in the velvet pouch on my vanity, and I want the navy wool coat from Bergdorf that is in the mudroom. Everything else I don't want. You can keep the cars. You can keep the watches. You can keep the Bentley. Jesus. Margaret will send it in writing in the morning. You've already decided all of this. Yes, Gregory, I have been deciding all of this for 3 weeks. I am very sorry. I know that is a lot of information. You have the rest of your life to think about it. You're being cruel, Viv. Am I? Yes. Gregory, I want you to listen to me very carefully. I have not been cruel tonight. I have been clear. You are confusing the two because for 22 years I was never clear with you, and so clarity for me sounds in your ear like cruelty. It isn't. I'm going to hang up now. Do not call me again. Talk to Roderick. Roderick talks to Margaret. That is the channel. Good night. Viv, she hung up. She set the phone very carefully, face down on the nightstand. She looked at Margaret. Margaret looked at her. Margaret's mouth twitched at one corner. You forgot to ask for the Basquiat drawing. He gets the Basquiat. He loves the Basquiat. Let him have one thing. Generous of you. It's the only Christian thing I've done all week. Margaret laughed, a real laugh, a tired one, and stood up and walked over and kissed the top of Vivian's head, which was something Vivian's mother had used to do, and which no one had done to her in about 30 years. Get some sleep, kid. Tomorrow's easier. Is it? Tomorrow there's no ballroom. Tomorrow there's no phone call. Tomorrow it's just paperwork. Paperwork is easy, Vivian. Paperwork is the part they never warn you about, because it turns out to be the part you can do. The next 11 weeks were paperwork. They were, more than anything else, the specific and grinding paperwork of dismantling a life. Margaret's office filed 34 separate motions in the first 10 days. The firm went into receivership on the 23rd of November. Celeste Lane was deposed on the 2nd of December in a windowless conference room in Midtown. And when Margaret came back from the deposition, she told Vivian, over dinner at a small restaurant on 71st Street, that Miss Lane had cried for 40 of the 90 minutes and had, toward the end, looked across the table at Margaret with the kind of face that 29-year-old women make when they finally understand that they have been, the entire time, the least important person in the room. She wasn't a villain, Vivian. She was a tool. He used her, and she let herself be used because she thought it was advancement. That's not evil. That's just stupid. Be a little sorry for her. Not much. A little. And Vivian had been. A little. The house on Ashmere Drive went on the market in January. The photographer came on a Tuesday morning when Vivian was in the city, and Beatrice, who had stayed on through the transition with a 3-year contract signed in Margaret's office, opened the door for him and made him coffee and watched him photograph the marble foyer from 7 different angles. And when Vivian called that evening to ask how it had gone, Beatrice said, "It photographed very well, ma'am. It has always photographed very well." Gregory did not go to prison. Margaret had been right. The criminal exposure had been thin by design. Dominic had wanted him ruined, not martyred, and prison would have given him a certain kind of dignity that ruin did not. He settled with the SEC in late December for an amount that ate almost the entirety of his share of the marital estate. He lost his license. He left New York at the end of January quietly in a rental car with 2 suitcases and a garment bag to a small house his lawyer had arranged for him in a town outside Sarasota that Vivian had never been to and did not plan to visit. He sent her, 2 weeks after he left, a single handwritten letter, 4 pages, which Margaret read before she did and which Margaret said she was allowed to read if she wanted to, and which Vivian, in the end, put in a kitchen drawer unopened and left there for 6 years. Harold Beck was removed from the board of what remained of Shaw Capital in early December. He went to a smaller firm in Greenwich. He did not, when Vivian passed him once on Madison Avenue in February, meet her eyes. Mr. Delacroix, in Montreal, received $11,430,000 from a federal settlement in mid-January. He sent, through Dominic, a single note of thanks to Vivian, handwritten on cream stationery, which read only, "Madame, thank you. I have waited a long time. You have done my waiting for me. With deep respect." Vivian kept that one. It went in a small cedar box on her new dresser, which was, by March, in a new bedroom in a new apartment on the Upper East Side that she had bought with her own money and decorated herself, room by slow room, without asking anyone's opinion. She saw Dominic in that period exactly twice. The first time was on the afternoon of December 4th, at the Ellsworth Club, in the same small library. He had asked her to come because there were, he said, A few final matters to be clean about. He meant Beck. He meant Delacroix. He meant the SEC timing. He meant, she gathered, not asking her anything personal at all, which was exactly how he had described himself to her in the beginning, and which she found now she appreciated rather than resented. At the end of the meeting, at the door, he did say one personal thing. He said, "I was not, Vivian, expecting to like you. It was inconvenient. I am telling you this so that you understand that if you do not wish to see me again, I will not contact you, and that if you do wish to see me again, at some point when you are more yourself, you will need to contact me. I am not going to be the reason you do or do not see someone while you are still unwinding a marriage. Do you understand?" "I understand." "Good." The second time was in late February for a lunch at a small French restaurant on East 64th that Elena Ruiz had recommended. Elena had actually, it turned out, recommended it to both of them independently, which was a coincidence that Dominic did not believe was a coincidence. They sat by the window. They ate quietly. He asked her how the apartment was coming along. She asked him whether it was true that he owned a vineyard in Tuscany, which was something a friend had told her at a lunch the week before. And he said with a small smile, "I own an interest in a vineyard in Tuscany. It is owned by a man named Arturo, whose daughter I put through Stanford. I sometimes drink the wine." They talked for an hour and a half, and neither of them mentioned the night at the Whitmore at all. At the end of the lunch, on the sidewalk, he took her hand briefly and said, "When you are ready, Vivian, call me. Not before. I am in no hurry." She watched him walk away down East 64th in a dark overcoat, and she stood there for a moment in the cold. And then she put on her gloves and went home to her empty new apartment and poured herself a glass of the same red wine they had drunk at lunch. Which she had, she realized as the label caught the light, asked the sommelier quietly to wrap up for her without telling Dominic. She sat on her new sofa in her new living room overlooking a strip of East 72nd Street with the glass in her hand, and she thought about 22 years in a house on Ashmere Drive, and she thought about the girl in the chapel in Newport at 26 with the bookkeeper's daughter's hands, and she thought about her mother in the vestry saying, "Not yet," and she thought about the man with the silver scar on his jaw saying, "You are not my mother." And she sat for a long time, and she did not cry, and she did not celebrate, and she simply drank her glass of wine in her own apartment, in her own city, in her own life, and at some point the streetlights on East 72nd came on, and the little living room went orange with them, and Vivian Carter, Shaw, still technically for another 17 days, set the empty glass on the coffee table and stood up and went to bed in her own bed, alone, and slept through the night. The divorce was final on the 16th of March, at 11:42 in the morning, in a courtroom in Lower Manhattan that Vivian had imagined would be larger and more formal than it turned out to be. It was a small room with scuffed linoleum and a judge who had a head cold and kept apologizing for needing to blow his nose. Gregory was not there. He had waived his appearance. Roderick Kyle had told Margaret that his client did not feel physically able to be present, which Margaret had translated for Vivian as "he cannot look you in the face." The whole thing took 19 minutes. Margaret stood up. The judge signed. Vivian walked out onto Center Street into a cold, bright March morning with a document in her handbag and a taxi waiting, and she realized, halfway across the sidewalk, that she had no idea what she was supposed to do for lunch. She called Margaret from the cab. "I don't know what to do now." "Sweetheart, that's the best problem a woman can have." "I'm serious." "So am I. Go eat a sandwich, walk through the park, buy yourself a piece of furniture you don't need, don't call him. Don't call him either for at least a week. Just be unaccounted for." Unaccounted for. The feeling is going to be strange. You haven't been unaccounted for since you were 26. Let it be strange. She ate the sandwich. She walked through the park. She did not buy the piece of furniture. What she did buy, in a small shop on Lexington, was a yellow ceramic pitcher with a chipped handle that she did not need and that no interior decorator would ever have approved of. And she carried it home under her arm, and she put it on the kitchen counter of her apartment, and she filled it with white tulips from the deli on the corner. And she stood in her own kitchen and looked at the pitcher for a long time. She did not call Dominic. Not for a week. Not for 2 weeks. Not for a month. She spent the month being unaccounted for mostly. She went to Paris by herself for 6 days, which she had never done in her entire life, and she stayed in a small hotel on the Rue Jacob that Elena Ruiz had recommended, and she ate alone in restaurants every night for 6 nights. And on the 5th night, the owner of a small wine bar in the 6th arrondissement, a woman in her 60s with a gray streak in her dark hair, asked Vivian, in English, what had happened to her, because she had that particular look, and Vivian, for reasons she still did not understand later, told her. The whole thing. The 22 years, the receipt, the ballroom, the green dress. It took about 40 minutes. The woman listened without interrupting, refilled Vivian's glass twice without being asked, and at the end said, in her soft French-accented English, "So, you are beginning." "I think I am." "Good. Begin slowly. The women who begin fast, She made a small dismissive gesture with her hand. They begin someone else's life again. You, I think, are ready to begin your own." Vivian thought about that for a long time on the flight home. She called Dominic on a Thursday in late April. She called from her own landline, which she had installed in the new apartment out of some obscure instinct for permanence, because cell phones had begun to feel, to her, like things that could be lost, and she did not want this particular call to be made on a thing that could be lost. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Vivian." "Hello." "Hello." Neither of them said anything for a moment. She realized, with a little bit of private amusement, that he was not going to fill the silence. He was not that kind of man. If she had called him to say only his name, he would have sat on the other end of the line for however long the silence lasted, and then he would have said good night and hung up. "I wondered," she said, "whether you would have dinner with me next Saturday." "Yes." "I haven't told you where." "I do not need to know where." "What if I said a truck stop in New Jersey?" "Then I would own a good pair of shoes I had not been using." She laughed. She actually laughed, out loud, in her own kitchen, with the yellow pitcher on the counter and the white tulips beginning by then to brown at the edges. "It's not a truck stop in New Jersey." "Pity." "It's a small place on East 78th. Do you know it?" "Bertaud's." "I know it." 8 o'clock. "Yes." "Dominic." "Yes." "I want to be clear about something." "Yes." "This is not the beginning of anything. I don't know yet what it is. I don't want you to arrive at Bertaud's with a plan. I don't have one. I am calling you because I would like to eat dinner with you and see what happens, and I wanted to say that out loud before we were across a table, so that we wouldn't be pretending with each other." There was a small, warm silence. "Vivian." "Yes. I have not had a plan since November 18th. "All right. I will see you Saturday." She hung up. She stood in the kitchen for a minute with her hand still on the receiver. Then she picked up the dying tulips, dropped them in the trash, rinsed the yellow pitcher, and went into the bedroom to decide what she was going to wear to dinner with a man she had, when she thought about it plainly, no real idea how to categorize. Bertaud's that Saturday had candles on the tables and a waiter who was too young for his own confidence, and a woman at the bar wearing a hat Vivian disliked on sight. Dominic was there before her, at a corner table, in a charcoal suit and no tie. He stood when she came in. He did not kiss her cheek. They had not, at that point in their acquaintance, ever kissed, not on any cheek. He simply pulled out her chair and sat down opposite her and said, "You cut your hair." 2 inches. "It suits you." "Thank you." They ordered. He asked her about Paris. She told him about the wine bar in the 6th. She asked him, for the first time, about his daughter, because Elena had once let slip the existence of a daughter, and he paused and then told her. Her name is Francesca. She is 31. She is a pediatric oncologist in Chicago. She has not spoken to her father in 11 years. And the way he said it made her understand, for the first time, that the man across the table from her had his own catalog of rooms he did not go into, and that she was not going to be permitted to walk into most of them. Not tonight. Not for a long time, maybe. Maybe never. She found, a little to her surprise, that she was not upset about this. She was, if anything, relieved. A man with no closed rooms, she had learned, was a man who was lying. They ate slowly. They talked about a book he was reading, about a show at a gallery on West 22nd, about whether anyone who had ever tried to ski should be permitted to ski again after the age of 50. He made her laugh twice. She made him laugh once, which felt to her like a victory on a different scale. The dinner lasted 2 hours and 20 minutes. He paid. She let him. On the sidewalk outside Bertaud's, under the yellow light of the street lamp, He turned to her and said, "Thank you, Vivian. That was the best evening I have had in about a year." "Likewise. May I call you?" "Please." "When?" "Whenever you want." "Good." He did not touch her. He did not lean in. He inclined his head, a small, formal nod, the way he had nodded at her in the library at the Ellsworth Club on a Saturday afternoon in October. And then he walked down 78th toward Park Avenue, and Vivian stood on the sidewalk and watched him go. And she felt very precisely two feelings at the same time. She felt like a 48-year-old woman who had just had a nice dinner with a man she was going to see again. And she felt like a woman who had, in the course of 4 months, rebuilt the inside of her own life from scratch, and who was now, for the first time in 22 years, having a Saturday night she had not rehearsed. She walked home. It was 9 blocks. She walked them slowly. They saw each other, after that first dinner, at a pace that was determined entirely by Vivian and that Dominic, to his credit, did not once push. Once a week in May. Twice a week in June. In July, he invited her to the vineyard in Tuscany that he had an interest in, and she went, because by then Margaret had told her, in the bluntest possible terms over lunch at a place on 68th, that she was behaving like a person who had been punished for having wants for 22 years, and was now trying to prove she could live without them, which, sweetheart, was not the same thing as having grown as a person. It was just a different kind of smallness. And Vivian had put down her fork and said, "Damn you, Margaret," and Margaret had said, "You're welcome." Tuscany was not the way any of it is ever described. She had been prepared by a certain kind of magazine for a cypress-lined driveway and a long table outdoors with 20 of his cousins. It was not that. It was a low, plain farmhouse that needed pointing on the south wall and a small kitchen with 1 copper pan that Arturo's wife insisted on using for everything, and a terrace that got the wrong light in the afternoon, and a dog named Oro, who was, Dominic explained apologetically, not a smart dog. I am sorry. We love her anyway. They stayed 9 days. Dominic wore the same pair of soft cotton trousers for most of it. He read, in the afternoons, a biography of a Roman emperor that he told her at dinner. With genuine interest he found essentially tedious. But there is a chapter coming about his teeth that I am told is excellent. On the 5th night, on the terrace, after a dinner of tomato bread and a piece of steak cut too thick, and then a small peach each, she told him about her mother, the whole thing. The bookkeeper's job in Patterson and the funeral in 2003 and the sentence in the vestry in Newport. He listened the way he had listened to her at the Ellsworth Club in October, which was to say, without any expression and with total attention. When she was done, he said only, "She was right," and poured her more wine, and did not try to add anything, because he was a man who understood that some sentences do not need a second sentence after them. On the 7th night, she did not go back to her own room, which she had been using, and she did not come out of his until the morning. Neither of them said anything about it at breakfast. Arturo's wife made coffee for 3 without comment. The dog chewed an old espadrille under the table. The world did not reorganize itself. Some things, Vivian thought, were simply allowed to happen to you at 48 when you had stopped expecting the world to reorganize itself around them. And those things were, she was discovering, the only ones that really stayed. They did not marry quickly, which was what the women of a certain kind of magazine, had such a magazine existed about her life, would have wanted them to do. They did not marry in the fall after Tuscany. They did not marry the following spring. They did not marry, in fact, until almost 3 years after the Whitmore Gala, on a Tuesday in late September, in a judge's chambers in Lower Manhattan, with Margaret Holloway as a witness and Elena Ruiz as the other witness, and no ring on either of their fingers until 10 minutes before the ceremony, when Dominic handed her a small pouch and said, "These are my mother's. You do not have to wear them. If they do not fit, do not try to make them fit." And there were 2 thin bands in the pouch, 1 gold and 1 silver, and they fit, and she put on the gold one and he put on the silver one, and they went down the elevator afterward and ate lunch at a diner 2 blocks away, and that was the wedding. There were 6 people at the dinner that night at a restaurant Elena had rented out on Bleecker, and one of them was Beatrice, who had cried when Vivian had asked her to come, and who had brought, as a gift, a small embroidered tea towel she had made herself over the course of 6 months, which had, on it, 2 initials stitched in navy blue, V and D, and between them, very small, a little match. Dominic had looked at the tea towel for a long moment, and then at Beatrice, and then, without saying anything, had folded the towel carefully and put it in the inside pocket of his jacket. And that was the closest Vivian ever came to seeing him cry. He never tried to silence her. That was the part she thought about most often in the years afterward, when she thought about the difference between the two marriages. He did not always agree with her. He disagreed with her, sometimes loudly, and he could be, when he was tired, short in a way that stung. And he had, she discovered over time, a habit of going quiet in a room for 40 minutes or an hour when something had hurt him, which was a habit she had to learn to wait out rather than chase. He was not perfect. He had a past she learned, over years, selected pieces of, and there were pieces she came to understand she was not going to be given, and she made her peace with that because the alternative was to be given a lie. And a lie was a thing she had already lived in for 22 years and would not live in again. He snored. He was vain about his hair. He refused to learn how the dishwasher in her kitchen worked, even after he had moved his books into her apartment, and then, a year later, they had bought a different apartment together on the Upper West Side and moved both their books into that one. He said once, in the middle of an argument about something small, whether she had committed to a trip to Montreal in November, or whether he had imagined her commitment, "Vivian, I am trying." And she had said, "I know you are, Dominic. I am also trying. We are both trying. That is the whole job. Please go sleep in the guest room tonight because I need to think." And he had gone, without protest. And in the morning, he had come back into the bedroom with coffee, and he had set the cup on her nightstand, and he had said, "You were right. I did imagine your commitment. I am sorry." And she had said, "Thank you. Come back to bed." And he had. That was the marriage. That was, in the end, the whole thing. It was not a fairy tale. It was a grown marriage between two grown people who had both been wrong before and had both been wronged before, and who had decided, with their eyes open, to try. The chemistry was real, the respect was real, the loyalty was real. None of it was perfect. All of it was chosen, every week, every month, and that, she came to believe, was the only kind of loyalty that ever meant anything. The kind that was chosen again, and not assumed. What? Gregory Shaw lived, in the end, for 9 more years after the Whitmore Gala. He lived in the house outside Sarasota that his lawyer had arranged, and then, when the money from the settlement began to run thin, in a smaller condominium in a building full of men with similar stories, and he died, at 68, of a heart attack on a Thursday afternoon in April, alone, in a chair on a screened porch, watching a baseball game on a television with the sound down. Vivian learned about it from a phone call from Roderick Kyle, who had, over the years, softened considerably toward her, and who had, in the end, been the only real friend Gregory had retained from the old life. Roderick told her Gregory had asked, a few weeks before, that she be informed if anything happened, and that was all he had asked. There was no letter. There was no will reading to attend. There was no funeral she was expected at. He had outlived, she realized as she hung up, almost everyone he had spent his career trying to impress, and he had died in a chair on a porch with the sound down on the ball game, which was, she thought, with a sadness that surprised her, the saddest specific detail she had ever been told about the end of a man's life. She sat with it for a while. She did not cry. She did not either feel nothing. What she felt was the thing she had always expected she would feel, eventually, about Gregory Shaw, which was a kind of clean, deep regret. Not for the divorce, not for the gala, not for any of it, but for the man he had been at 34 in a restaurant on Lexington the night he had told her with his whole face that he wanted a wife who would walk into any room and make him proud. That man had existed. She was not going to pretend he hadn't. That man had, somewhere in the 22 years, gotten lost inside the other man, and the other man had died on the porch, and neither of them were coming back. And there was, finally, nothing to do about it but to acknowledge that it had been a real thing, and then to set it down. She did not tell Dominic right away. She made dinner. She set the table. She poured them both a glass of wine. Over the second course, she said quietly, "Gregory died this afternoon." He did not react the way a lesser man would have reacted. He did not say, "Good." He did not say, "I'm sorry." He did not pretend not to know the man's history with her, and he did not pretend the man's death was her tragedy when it wasn't. He set down his fork. He reached across the table and took her hand, and he said, "Are you all right?" "I'm all right." "Do you want to talk about him?" Not tonight. Another night. Yes. Good. That was all. They finished dinner. They did the dishes together. They watched, for an hour, a documentary about bees that neither of them were very interested in, but that Vivian had started the week before. In bed, later, he held her, and neither of them said anything, and she slept. This is, in its way, a story about a woman who discovered a receipt in her husband's coat pocket on a Tuesday morning. It is about that, and it is about a green dress, and it is about a man who held the match. But if the woman Vivian Carter became over the years she lived after November 18th could tell you what this story was really about, she would say, she thought, 3 things. And she thought about them often, on quiet afternoons in the apartment on the Upper West Side, when she was alone with a cup of tea and the light coming in over the books. The first thing she would say is that no one is disposable. That is not a sentiment. That is a rule about the world. The cruelest thing one human being can do to another is not to betray them, not to leave them, not even to humiliate them in a ballroom in front of 612 of their peers. The cruelest thing is to decide silently, over a long period of time, that they are the sort of person who can simply be replaced. Gregory Shaw had not believed she would fight. He had believed she would, in the quiet, terrible way women in her position had been fighting for generations, simply dissolve. He had believed this because he had allowed himself, over 4 years, to forget that he was married to a specific person, a woman with a mother in New Jersey and a scholarship background, and strong hands, and a capacity for cold calculation she had never had occasion to use on him before. And he had begun instead to think of her as a category called wife, a category with certain predictable behaviors. That was the mistake. That was always the mistake, she thought, of the Gregorys of the world. They stopped seeing the actual woman, and they started managing a category. And the category one day closed the category's bank account and hired Margaret Holloway. The second thing she would say is that strength, for a woman, is almost never loud. In the weeks after the Whitmore, people she had known for years, women mostly, had said to her in the soft, horrified voices of people who had just witnessed something they did not know how to put into a card, "Vivian, you were so strong. How did you do it?" And she had smiled and thanked them and said, "I was lucky, and I had good help," which was true, but the full truth, which she said only to Margaret once, over a glass of wine in Margaret's office 3 years after the divorce, was that strong had very little to do with what she had done. She had not been strong on that Tuesday in October. She had been quiet, and she had been patient, and she had been for 3 weeks the best actress in New York, and she had been for a long time before that the kind of watcher that wives become when they are not being listened to. The kind who notice everything and file everything and say nothing, and who accumulate, without meaning to, a kind of knowledge of their own husbands that the husbands would be horrified to learn they possess. That was not strength. That was attention. The strength had been in deciding, on one specific morning in a marble hallway, to finally use what the attention had given her. The strength had been in not pretending anymore that she did not see what she saw. Everything after that had been, in its way, paperwork. The third thing she would say, and this was the one she thought about most because it was the one that had cost her the most to learn, was that the reward for surviving a cage is not another cage, no matter how pretty. The mistake she had almost made, she realized later, was to walk out of her marriage to Gregory and straight into the arms of a man who could protect her, and to mistake the protection for the prize. Dominic could protect her. Dominic had, in fact, protected her, and she did not pretend, in the later years, that he had not. But the reason the thing between them had worked, in the end, was that she had not taken the protection as the ending. She had taken it as a doorway, and she had walked through the doorway alone, and she had spent 4 solid months being unaccounted for, as Margaret had put it, and she had bought a yellow ceramic pitcher with a chipped handle, and she had gone to Paris by herself. And she had built, in an apartment she paid for, a life she had furnished without asking anyone's opinion, and only then, only when she was certain that the life she was building was actually her own and not a more comfortable version of someone else's. Had she picked up her own landline telephone in her own kitchen and called the man and said, "I wondered whether you would have dinner with me next Saturday." The order, she came to believe, had mattered enormously. Most women who walked out of cages, she thought, were asked by the world to walk directly into new ones, because new cages at least were shaped like freedom. The trick was to stop, in between, in the uncomfortable open air, long enough to figure out what you actually wanted when no one was looking, and then to go get it without apologizing. Well, Sean, on the 10th anniversary of the Whitmore Gala, a date she had never particularly meant to mark, but that had crept up on her over coffee one November morning, Vivian stood at the kitchen window of the apartment on the Upper West Side and watched a thin, cold rain move over Central Park. And she thought about the girl in the chapel in Newport at 26. And she thought about the woman at 48 who had walked into a ballroom in a forest green dress. And she thought about the woman at 58 who was, that morning, standing barefoot in a kitchen in a sweater that belonged to someone else, stirring a second cup of coffee. Dominic came in behind her. He did not say anything. He put a hand lightly on the small of her back, the same place he had put his hand once on a dance floor 10 years and 6 days ago, and stood next to her at the window, and they watched the rain for a while. "What are you thinking?" he said eventually. "I'm thinking Beatrice will be here at 1. "Yes." "I'm thinking I'm glad we bought enough wine." "Yes." "I'm thinking about the receipt." He looked at her. "Still," he said, "sometimes, not with pain anymore, just as a fact." "Yes. I'm thinking that most women who find that receipt don't do what I did, Dominic. They go to bed with it and they don't do anything. And the reason they don't is not that they're weak. The reason is that no one helped them. I had help. I had Elena. I had Margaret. I had you. Most women don't. Most women are told by the people around them to be reasonable and to think of the children and to consider what they have to lose. And by the time they are done being told those things, they are 70 and it is too late, and they have spent their whole lives quiet in the wrong house." "Yes. I think about that a lot. More now than I did at the beginning." "Yes. I don't know what I do about it. I'm not a foundation. I'm not an activist. I'm a 58-year-old woman with a decent apartment and a second husband and a kitchen I like standing in." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Vivian." "Yes." "You could be a foundation if you wanted." She looked at him. "You have the means now. You have the name in certain rooms. You have the attention of a certain kind of press. You could, if you wanted, fund the Margarets. You could fund the Elenas. You could fund the 3 women who helped the 1 woman, because it is always 3 women who help the 1 woman, in my experience. You could make it easier for the next Vivian on the next Tuesday morning in the next marble hallway, and you could do it quietly, and you could do it for the next 20 years, if you wanted." She looked at him for a long time. "Would you help me?" "If you asked." "I'm asking." "Then yes." She turned back to the window. The rain was coming harder now. A man with a yellow umbrella was crossing Central Park West against the light. "All right," she said, and it was not dramatic, and it was not a vow, and it was not, in any literary sense, a moment. It was simply a decision, made on an ordinary morning in an ordinary kitchen by a woman who had, at a certain point in her life, discovered that she was the kind of person who made decisions, and who had since then been careful to keep making them. "All right, what?" Dominic said, smiling slightly. "I'm going to call Margaret this afternoon." "Good. It's going to be called something boring. Not my name, not your name. Something administrative, a fund. I don't want it to be a monument." "Good. And it's going to help women get out." "Yes. That's it. That's the whole mission statement. It's going to help women get out." "Yes." She leaned, just slightly, against his shoulder. "Dominic." "Yes." "Thank you for holding the match." "Vivian, you lit it yourself." "I know, but thank you anyway." He did not say you're welcome. He did not say anything. He took her hand, the one with the thin gold band on it, and he held it loosely, and they stood at the window together, and after a while the rain eased, and the man with the yellow umbrella disappeared into the park, and Beatrice called at 12:40 to say she was running a little late because the subway was a mess, and Vivian laughed and said, "Take your time," and hung up, and went to put on a proper sweater of her own. That afternoon she called Margaret Holloway. That evening she wrote on a piece of plain white paper at the kitchen table the first rough notes of a small organization that, over the next 11 years, would help a little more than 400 women leave marriages they had been quiet in for too long. It would never be famous. It would never have her name on the door. Most of the women it helped would never know who had paid for the attorney or the prepaid phone in the back of the lingerie drawer. or the hotel suite on the night of the gala, or the woman in the lobby with the evening bag, or the 1,000 small quiet logistics that made the difference every single time between a woman who got out and a woman who stayed. That was how it ended in the end. Not with a ballroom, not with a dress, not with a photograph on the front page of the journal. It ended with a woman at a kitchen table in a sweater that belonged to someone she had chosen, writing the first notes of a way to pass the match along. She closed the notebook around 10. She went to bed. Dominic was already asleep, on his side, snoring a little, and she got in and turned off the lamp, and she lay for a moment in the dark, and she thought very briefly of her mother's hands on her shoulders in a vestry in Newport 32 years before, and of the sentence her mother had said to her, "Vivi, a man who is good to you in public and cold to you in private, you leave, you don't wait, you leave." And she thought, with a small private smile in the dark of her own bedroom, in her own apartment, in her own life, "Ma, I left. It took me a long time, but I left." Then she closed her eyes and slept, and the rain came back against the window sometime after midnight, and the city went on with its business around her, and that was truly the end of it.